Chapter 23:10 Urdia vs. Anna. As soon as he saw the system notification, Shifeng accepted the legacy. He didn't know how good a legacy with an 85% completion rate would be, but it was undoubtedly better than the 15% legacy he had found earlier. After Shifeng accepted the legacy, countless divine runes began to flow from the grave toward him, forming a glowing imprint on the back of his hand. Suddenly, Shifeng bore the mark of a purple-gold sword. The moment the mark formed, Urdia descended into madness. His muscles bulged and a cloak of fire enveloped his frame. The temperature around him soared, and the flaming cloak burned the earth under his feet to black ash. If Shifeng hadn't activated Absolute Domain, he'd likely lose astonishing amounts of HP due to his proximity to the heroic spirit. With Urdia going into full berserk mode and his Absolute Domain's duration almost up, Shifeng switched the 7 Luminaries' rings Aura of Earth to the Aura of Wind and activated Gale Domain to make a hasty retreat. While all forms of teleportation were prohibited in the Voidland's inner area, flying, fortunately, was not. Gale Domain was Shifeng's only hope of escaping from the inner area. Without it, he wouldn't have any chance of leaving the inner region even if he had the legacy. He no longer had 9 dragons to rely on, and he had a titled, Tier 3 heroic spirit after him. However, before Shifeng could leave the grave, Urdia charged forth like a meteor. The heroic spirit was so fast that not even the black dragon could stop him in time. Boom! Urdia crashed into Shifeng, and the golden, divine runes that protected him actually trembled. This hadn't even happened when Urdia had hacked and slashed at Shifeng earlier. The heroic spirit proceeded to brandish his flaming greatsword at Shifeng over and over. For a moment, even Shifeng was helpless against the countless sword lights. He couldn't keep up with the speed of any of these attacks. Urdia's attack speed wasn't that much faster than his, but he couldn't keep up with the heroic spirit's reaction speed. With Urdia's basic attributes, the heroic spirit could finish Shifeng off in 2 or 3 hits, even if Shifeng activated twofold berserk. Absolute Domain only had 6 seconds remaining, and Shifeng was still nearly 1,500 yards away from the inner region's barrier. Throwing caution to the wind, he flew straight for the barrier. Despite the fact that Urdia couldn't fly, the undead had no issues keeping up with Shifeng, continuously attacking the fleeing swordsman. Every one of Urdia's attacks had enough power to injure mythic monsters. Shifeng would have already died several times if it hadn't been for Absolute Domain's protection. 5 seconds. 3 seconds. 1 second. Unfortunately, Shifeng's flying speed was fast, but he couldn't reach the barrier within 6 seconds. He was still roughly 500 yards from his target when Absolute Domain's effects wore off. As soon as they did, Shifeng felt a scorching heat envelop his body, dealing minus 10,000 damage per second. Seeing the divine runes fade from Shifeng's body, Urdia sneered at his prey. He pushed off the ground and arrived before Shifeng in an instant, plunging his flaming greatsword down on Shifeng's head. 8 extreme slashes. This time, every one of the 8 sword lights contained Tier 4 power. Not even the black dragon would be strong enough to block the attack, much less Shifeng. Fortunately, Shifeng had prepared for this moment and activated Defensive Blade. Another series of metallic clangs echoed throughout the forest. Urdia had exhausted over half of Defensive Blade's block counts in that one exchange. By the time Defensive Blade ended, Shifeng had only moved 50 yards closer to the barrier. As Urdia was about to launch another attack, Shifeng activated Abyssal Bind. Over 20 pitch-black chains emerged from the void, binding Urdia and forcing the heroic spirit to a grinding halt. At Tier 3, Abyssal Bind could hold a target for up to 5 seconds, and it should be 100% effective against a Tier 3 being like Urdia. It was also Shifeng's final trump card. However, before Shifeng could relax, he heard the sound of a chain shattering. When he had gone berserk, Urdia had become nearly stronger than a mythic monster. It had only taken the heroic spirit an instant to shatter one of the chains. As if they were made of paper, the other chains began to break, one after another. For the crime of desecrating a saint's grave, you will die. Urdia bellowed as he swung his freed arms, slashing his great sword at Shifeng, who stood over 50 yards away. As Urdia swung his great sword, a torrent of fire swept toward Shifeng. Shifeng spun, meeting the attack with his swords as the flames were about to hit him. Void Shield. Boom. The Void Shield, which had 10 times Shifeng's maximum HP, nearly shattered as a result of the attack, and the impact threw Shifeng backward over 30 yards. What a frightening move. Shifeng silently celebrated when he saw that his Void Shield had only cracked. If he hadn't responded appropriately, that attack would have killed him. Urdia was far more powerful than Shifeng had imagined. Had he allowed his strength and greed to blind him, challenging the largest grave instead, he would have died the moment his absolute domain's duration ended. Meanwhile, thanks to Urdia's attack, Shifeng and the heroic spirit were now separated by 100 yards. Although Abyssal Bind wouldn't hold down Urdia for 5 seconds, it should be able to keep him in place for 2. Fortunately, as a Tier 3 heroic spirit, Urdia couldn't attack a target that was so far away. In the remaining 2 seconds, Shifeng widened the gap between him and his pursuer by more than 300 yards. Urdia's movement speed was much higher than Shifeng's, but during a chance, Urdia would need some time to get within attack range. Meanwhile, Shifeng continued to move closer to the barrier. 150 yards. 100 yards. 50 yards. When Urdia was less than 80 yards away from Shifeng and was about to bombard the fleeing swordsman once more, Shifeng finally slipped through the magic barrier. Enraged, Urdia sent another wave of fire at Shifeng, but this time, Shifeng retrieved a Summon Guard scroll and called forth Anna. As Anna appeared before him, Shifeng breathed a sigh of relief. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. He might not be a match for a titled, Tier 3 heroic spirit, but that wasn't the case for Anna. Anna was an epic guard with a 113-point growth potential. She might not rival an NPC hero of the same tier, but she wasn't far from it. She'd have no problems holding off Urdia. Calmly, Anna swung her staff and cast a spell in response to Urdia's fiery attack. A black-white, two-fold magic array appeared before the personal guard. The moment Urdia's flames encountered the array, it looked like they had crashed into the side of a rocky mountain. No matter how much fire crashed into and burned the magic array, they didn't do any damage. Alright, let's leave. With Urdia chasing after him, even after he had crossed the inner region's magic barrier, Shifeng immediately activated the Tier 2 group instantaneous teleportation scroll he had pulled from his bag earlier, leaving the island with Anna by his side. Chapter 2311, Mana Body Star Moon Kingdom, White River City. Once Shifeng and Anna had arrived in the Voidland's safe zone, he used a return scroll and teleported back to White River City. However, he nearly thought he had arrived at the wrong place when he emerged from the teleportation array. Many of the players in the teleportation hall had already reached level 90, and there were quite a few level 91 players among the crowd. Not even Dragonheart Island's experts should have reached this level yet. He had only been busy with his Tier 3 promotion quest for a few days. The effects of the planar passages opening early are so drastic? The open planar passages was the only explanation Shifeng could think of. The planar passages activation wouldn't just lead to new players on the main continent, it would also bring in an abundance of resources, including leveling resources. During Shifeng's previous life, the planar passages activation had triggered a leveling frenzy among the main continent's players, but it had been nothing compared to this. However, after giving the matter some more thought, Shifeng knew such a situation wasn't impossible. His presence in God's domain had already caused a significant butterfly effect, and players in this life leveled much faster than in the past. With the planar passages activating before mainstream players had even reached level 100, the increased resources would have a greater effect on players. With so many excellent grinding spots available, it was only natural that players would level up faster than before. As Shifeng was about to leave the teleportation hall, a 100-man team of independent players walked into the building. Noticing the team's arrival, many players in the hall turned their attention to the newcomers, chatting quietly amongst themselves. Quick look, just a silver arrow. They must be heading out to raid another level 95 team dungeon. I wonder when our adventurer team will be ready to do the same. Your adventurer team? Dream on. Even the Black Dragon Empire's players are just starting to raid level 95 team dungeons, not to mention Star Moon Kingdom's players. Moreover, Silver Arrow was one of the first adventurer teams to join the Shadowless Adventurer Alliance, and it's received a lot of help from the Shadow Empire Adventurer Team L. I guess you're right, but joining the Shadowless Adventurer Alliance is so difficult. I've heard that many of the well-known adventurer teams from the neighboring kingdoms have been rejected. That's right. The passing rate is incredibly low, but as long as an adventurer team becomes a member, it'll undergo a metamorphosis. Not only will its overall strength significantly increase, but not even first-rate guilds and superpowers experts would dare to mess with it. The various players discussing the Silver Arrow adventurer team did so in envy. Most of Silver Arrow's members had already reached level 92, which not even Superpower's main force members had reached. The surrounding players were even more jealous when they saw the equipment Silver Arrow's members wore. Every member of the adventurer team had a full set of level 90 fine gold equipment. Although many expert players had climbed to level 90 or above due to the planar passages, very few had acquired level 90 weapons and equipment, much less top-tier items. With a full set of level 90 fine gold equipment, players would qualify to raid level 95 team dungeons. The Otherworld's adventurer alliances have already developed this far? Shi Feng had to admit that he was a little surprised to see Silver Arrow's members. The Otherworld's adventurer teams had only begun to form adventurer alliances after the main continent's various powers had tried to invade these otherworlds multiple times in the past. The adventurer alliances had then relied on independent players to contest for the level 100+ neutral maps on the main continent, at which point, many of the main continent's powers had begun to perish. Shi Feng had never thought the butterfly effect would be so massive that Otherworld's powers would form adventurer alliances by this stage of the game. With this, these Otherworld powers would pose a much greater threat to the main continent's powers than they had during his previous life. After the commotion Silver Arrow's team had caused, Shi Feng rushed out of the teleportation hall and made his way to the library. He had thought that he was far ahead of most players since he had reached level 100 and completed his Tier 3 promotion quest. He also had Cola and the others, who had already reached level 95 and beyond. They should reach level 100 soon. However, it seemed that the butterfly effect he had caused would be disastrous for him. If he couldn't quickly become a lord of a neutral map, as the various superpowers in the past had, both he and Zero Wing would vanish into history. Half an hour later, Shi Feng arrived at the top floor of White River City's library. He found Charlene quietly reading an ancient tome from her throne at the far end of the Star Moon Hall. "You really know how to surprise people. I thought you'd be stuck there for several months," Charlene said, smiling as she pulled her gaze from the book and looked at Shi Feng. "Are you really prepared to inherit your legacy? You only have one opportunity. Your performance will greatly affect your future." "Yes, I'm ready." Shi Feng nodded. The Tier 3 promotion quest consisted of 2 parts. Locating the lost legacy was the first part, and inheriting it was the second. The second part was also the most important of the promotion quest, in which one would change their body's mana framework. As a major turning point in God's domain, players' physiques and their body's mana framework would transform when they reached Tier 3. Of course, not all mana frameworks were equal. The difference in their strengths would even exist among players with ordinary Tier 3 classes. Players inherited a variety of legacies, and those with different mana frameworks would display varying levels of strength. However, these differences wouldn't display in a player's physique, but would affect the world's rules. For example, Tier 2 players could only survive for a short time in level 100+ neutral maps due to the area's environments, even if they just stood there and did nothing. In comparison, Tier 3 players could survive for a long time in a level 100+ neutral map due to their body's mana framework. The stronger a player's mana framework was, the greater their survivability would be in poor environments. Their mana framework would also largely impact their stamina and concentration recovery rates. This was why Tier 3 classes had such a huge impact in God's domain. Although Shi Feng had already obtained his legacy, he wasn't out of the woods yet. His ability to inherit the legacy was far more important. Shi Feng had only completed a Tier 3 Bronze Legacy in the past, and although the Bronze Legacy had been among the best of its peers, and he had formed a nearly perfect mana body, it hadn't been enough to get him through his Tier 4 promotion quest. Normally, only players with a silver-ranked mana body could survive in the harsh environments that served as the venue for Tier 4 promotion quests. As a result, he had always been a step away from clearing the quest in his previous life. Of course, if he had had a piece of legendary equipment back then, the results would have been different. Even a piece of fragmented legendary equipment would have changed the outcome significantly. Unfortunately, he never managed to find one, so he hadn't been able to cross that threshold. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Alright, this is your decision, but you must remember that your time is limited. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Charlene warned. Seeing how determined Shi Feng was to see the rest of his promotion quest through, she began to chant the incantation. The sword mark on the back of Shi Feng's right hand began to burn, and at the same time, countless divine runes appeared across his body, gradually forming a gigantic, fourfold magic array. 3 windows displaying mana body samples then appeared before him, each more complex than the last. Shi Feng was ecstatic the moment he saw the magic array and sample mana bodies. The number of layers the magic array had, which would construct the mana body, represented the rank of the mana body that could be created. A single-layered magic array represented bronze rank, a 2-layered magic array represented silver rank, and so on. The mana body samples represented the complete mana body standard. The first sample represented the basic standard, the second represented the intermediate standard, and the third represented the advanced standard. However, the magic array that enveloped Shi Feng now had 4 layers. He had never heard of a 4-fold magic array creating a mana body before. Chapter 23:12 Advanced Epic. Once Charlene had formed the magic array, a series of system notification rang in Shi Feng's ears. System, congratulations on completing your Tier 3 promotion quest and obtaining the Blade Saint Legacy. Legacy completion rate 85%. Advanced Epic Legacy received. You have 4 hours to construct your mana body. System, congratulations on being the first player to complete the Tier 3 promotion quest. You will have 1 additional hour to construct your mana body. Epic rank. Shi Feng was stunned when he read the system notifications. The highest rank mana body he had heard of during his previous life had only been gold rank, and only 1 out of every 10,000 experts had earned a gold-ranked mana body during their Tier 3 promotion quests. These experts had been powerhouses in level 100+ neutral maps, strong enough to give the various superpowers massive headaches. A gold mana body provided more than high adaptability to harsh environments. It also elevated players' stamina and concentration recovery rates to extraordinary highs. Players' stamina and concentration would recover by absorbing the mana around them. Depending on the density of the mana in the area, their recovery rates would increase by 30% to 60%. With such a significant improvement to their stamina and concentration recovery rates, players would no longer have to rely on stamina equipment, replacing such items with equipment that provided more raw power. This was why players with gold mana bodies were so much stronger than ordinary experts and could freely roam in level 100+ neutral maps. Even superpowers would find these players quite challenging to hunt down. This was also why the various superpowers' influence on independent players would significantly decrease when they reached Tier 3, even to the extent that top adventurer teams could begin to contend with superpowers. The Midnight Tea Party was a prime example of this. After level 100, players had had an absurdly difficult time trying to join the Midnight Tea Party during Shi Feng's previous life. Once the adventurer team's members had reached Tier 3, a gold-ranked mana body had become a requirement for joining the team. Even superpowers had been helpless against an entire group of experts with gold mana bodies in level 100+ neutral maps. And Shi Feng hadn't even heard of an epic mana body. Moreover, he now had a total of 5 hours to construct his mana body. In the past, he had only had 1 hour to construct his bronze mana body, and players with gold mana bodies had only been given 2 hours. The process of constructing a mana body was mostly the same across the board. The outcome depended on how much one could complete in the allotted time, and one's progress depended on how much time they invested in the trials. You can begin your mana body's construction now. Remember, you only have 5 hours. If you fail to complete a mana body before time runs out, the magic array will grant you the most basic mana body available, and your efforts will have gone to waste, Charlene reminded Shi Feng seriously. Understood. He nodded, understanding how important this matter was. Immediately, Shi Feng carefully inspected the 3 mana body samples hovering before him. Each of the mana bodies displayed was different and more complicated than the last. The simplest of the 3 was several times more complex than the Peak Bronze Legacy's mana body he had obtained in the past. Not only did these samples involve magic arrays, but they also required divine runes and refined mana manipulation. Any ordinary player might be able to copy the mana body samples blindly, but their completion rate wouldn't be high. Naturally, a low completion rate would severely affect one's combat power. A player's mana body would affect their control with their skills and spells in the future. A poorly constructed mana body would result in low mana conductibility. This would limit players' ability to use Tier 3 skills and spells with a completion rate of 90% or higher, since players had to actively guide and control their mana during the process to amply their skills or spells' power. This was also why experts in Shi Feng's previous life had preferred to aim for less complex mana bodies to ensure high completion rates, rather than aim for a more complex mana body with a low completion rate. If players constructed a perfect mana body, it wouldn't negatively affect their combat power, which would be a significant help when challenging their Tier 4 promotion quests in the future. Shi Feng spent around 10 minutes inspecting the 3 mana body samples he had been given. Although the advanced mana body is extremely complex and even involves multi-line mana manipulation, I have 5 hours to play around with. I should give it a try. Having made his decision, Shi Feng focused on the advanced mana body sample and began to manipulate the mana within him. There might not be a huge difference between an intermediate mana body's environmental adaptability and that of an advanced mana body, but the difference between the 2 options' recovery rates and defense was massive. Naturally, players' defense would undergo a considerable transformation when they reached Tier 3 and obtained their mana body. Their toughness as a Tier 2 player couldn't even compare. With a mana body, a layer of protective mana would envelop their frame, making them less prone to physical injury, which would reduce their combat power from ordinary attacks. Naturally, the higher the mana body's rank was, the stronger this protective layer would be. It would also help players recover from physical injuries much faster. Time flew by. After nearly 20 minutes, Shi Feng had finally finished constructing his first mana body. Shi Feng could feel himself grow much stronger the instant he completed his mana body. Now, the surrounding mana actively flowed into him, giving him a mentally refreshed feeling. System, mana body constructed. Completion rate 64%. Do you wish to keep this mana body? I barely passed? Sure enough, the advanced mana body isn't easy to construct. Shi Feng gave the completion rate a bitter smile. But to think that this mana body is so powerful despite a 64% completion rate, an epic mana body is really amazing. Normally, a mana body with a 60% completion rate was only considered passable. If one failed to achieve a passing completion rate in the designated time, they'd be stuck with the default mana body. With the default option, achieving a 90% completion rate with Tier 3 skills and spells would be practically impossible. Players typically needed a 75% completion rate mana body to ensure their skills and spells would remain unaffected. In the past, Shi Feng had constructed his bronze mana body with a 95% completion rate. At that standard, a direct hit from a mysterious iron weapon had, at most, left a small scratch, hardly affecting his combat power. However, he didn't have much hope of achieving a 95% completion rate with his mana body in this life. An epic mana body was simply too complex. His only goal was to get an 80% completion rate to avoid any negative effects to his combat power. Even with an 80% completion rate with an epic mana body, only secret silver weapons and better would be capable of physically injuring him. Shi Feng then started his second attempt. After the first attempt, he chose not to focus on speed. Rather, He took great care, slowly constructing the mana body. After more than half an hour, Shifeng had ended up with a 72% completion rate, just short of the 75% threshold. Shifeng invested a full hour for his third attempt, but he had only earned a 74% completion rate. What am I missing? He began to grow frustrated as he examined the advanced mana body sample again. He had already spent nearly half of his allotted time, yet he hadn't constructed an adequate advanced mana body. If he continued to waste time, he wouldn't even have enough time to attempt the intermediate mana body's construction. He had performed every step with great precision, yet he still only achieved a 74% completion rate. During his previous life, he hadn't been anywhere near the refinement realm standard, yet he had still managed a 95% completion rate with his mana body. However, even as a domain realm expert, he had only reached a 74% completion rate. It was unbelievable. No, that's not right. Shifeng suddenly snapped out of his daze. My mana manipulation hadn't been nearly as refined as it is now. I had glossed over some of the construction processes then, yet I still earned a 95% completion rate. This mana body sample is far more complex, but with my current standards, it shouldn't be this hard to achieve the same results. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Is my thirst for perfection having the opposite effect? Thinking up to this point, Shifeng began another attempt. This time, instead of trying to perfect all aspects of the construction process, he focused on certain parts, while glossing over the rest. This time, he completed the mana body in less than half an hour. The instant he completed his mana body, his 5 senses underwent a qualitative transformation. His affinity with the ambient mana skyrocketed. System, mana body constructed. Completion rate 91%. Do you wish to keep this mana body? Chapter 23:13, Prototype Domain I Succeeded? Shifeng was momentarily stunned when he heard the system notification. He had never considered that he'd achieve a 91% completion rate. An epic mana body was many times more complex than a bronze-ranked version, and even achieving a 90% with a silver mana body was immensely difficult. There were very few players in God's domain that were capable of achieving a 90% completion rate with a gold mana body. As far as Shifeng could remember, the player with the highest completion rate gold mana body had been Alice, the Witch of the West, in the past. She had managed to secure a peak gold mana body with a 98% completion rate. Of course, Alice was extraordinarily talented, which was why she had obtained such a high completion rate. Her manipulation of mana was simply godlike. Not even veteran domain realm experts could match her. Thanks to her powerful mana body, she had remained at the peak of God's domain even after becoming a Tier 6 mage god. The higher a mana body's completion rate, the more frighteningly powerful the mana body would be, especially for high-ranked mana bodies. Mana bodies might not provide any bonus basic attributes, but they offered significant increases to stamina and concentration recovery, defense, and self-healing capabilities. A gold mana body with a 98% completion rate could even reinforce players' control over their mana, allowing them to exhibit greater power with their skills and spells. Because of this, Alice had undergone a qualitative transformation after reaching Tier 3. Her mana manipulation had already been impressive, and after receiving the boons from her mana body, she had been able to achieve a 100% completion rate with practically all of her Tier 3 spells. Most peak experts had only been able to maintain a 90% completion rate with their Tier 3 spells after arduous training, yet Alice managed to level out at 100% in a very short time. After reaching a 90% completion rate with a Tier 3 spell, every additional percentage would significantly increase the spell's power. At 100% completion rate, a player's Tier 3 spell could even contend with the spells Tier 3 heroes used. It was easy to imagine how devastating these spells would be against players. Although Shifeng hadn't achieved a 98% completion rate, earning a 91% was beyond his expectations. I'll keep it. Snapping out of his daze, Shifeng promptly chose to keep his current mana body. There was no save option when constructing a mana body. If players gave up on a construction attempt, they'd have to start over. Hence, players had to have a clear goal in mind when constructing their mana body. Once they'd reached that goal, it would be wise to accept the mana body and avoid any further attempts. If one continued to seek a better outcome, they'd eventually run out of time and lose everything. Shi Feng had seen many players make that mistake in his previous life. The endless pursuit of perfection was the reason that many expert players had been forced to delete their accounts and begin again. While players could set up a stronger foundation by starting a new account, they'd also lose out on many opportunities. Others would have already explored the low-level maps, leaving little for new players. When starting a new account, players weren't guaranteed to become as powerful as they had been with their old one. While part of the reason that Shi Feng had achieved a 91% completion rate was his discovery of the correct thought process, luck was a larger part. He wasn't confident of repeating these results, and if he tried and earned an 89% completion rate, he'd just cry. There was a huge difference between a mana body with an 89% completion rate and one with a 90%. Mana bodies with a 75% completion rate or above wouldn't negatively affect players, and those with an 85% to 89% completion rate would receive a significant boost to their defense and stamina and concentration recovery. Mana bodies with a 90% to 94% completion rate, however, were considered top grade, and all of the aforementioned bonuses would be maxed out. If he had a high probability of achieving a 95% completion rate or above, another attempt might be worth the risk. A 93% or 94% completion rate wouldn't make much of a difference, after all. However, he'd be ruined if he earned a completion rate below 90%. After Shi Feng accepted the mana body, the magic array around him flashed with a blinding light, and a horrific amount of mana gathered rapidly before flowing into him. As the torrent of mana filled him, Shi Feng felt like his body had been set on fire. The burning sensation was far more intense than it had been with his peak bronze mana body. But as his advanced epic mana body began to take shape, Shi Feng's perception of the world around him grew sharper. After 6 seconds, magic circuits began to surface across Shi Feng's body, and the ambient mana steadily gathered within him. Although the magic circuits faded away 2 seconds later, the mana didn't stop flowing into him. System, congratulations! You have become a Tier 3 Blade Saint and obtained an advanced epic mana body. All basic attributes plus 400, all resistance plus 80, attack power and attack speed increased by 30%, all basic attributes increased by 60%, and physique increased by 70%. Rewarding 80 legacy skill points. Finally, I got my body back. Shi Feng was ecstatic as he felt the new changes. Tier 3. He had spent nearly a decade as a Tier 3 player during his previous life, so he was most familiar with this tier. Now that he had recovered to his peak, he could finally exhibit his true combat power. While Shi Feng basked in the familiar strength, he noticed that his perception had become drastically sharper than before. He could even sense the flow of mana in the air. A prototype domain. The sensation astonished Shi Feng. Is this an advanced epic mana body's ability? Previously, he'd only been able to perceive such details within a 30-yard radius around him by relying on his 5 senses. Now, however, his perception had extended to 50 yards away. Moreover, he felt like an absolute overlord within the 50-yard radius. Of course, he didn't actually have control over this area. He only had rudimentary control of the ambient mana. Even so, this was a prototype domain. A domain operated on the principle of controlling the mana in a specific area to create a miniature world that favored the player. Although he couldn't suppress his enemies with a prototype domain, he could manipulate the ambient mana and reduce the mana density where his enemies stood. The decreased density wouldn't affect players' basic attributes, but it would impact their concentration in battle. Such an ability would definitely grant him an edge in combat. Moreover, he could sense that his stamina and concentration recovery rates had improved by at least 70% due to his new mana body. He had also become tough enough that not even full-powered attacks from a secret silver weapon could easily injure him. In other words, if a player wielding a secret silver weapon struck the unprotected parts of his body, their damage would be reduced to the lowest possible value as if they had struck a piece of armor. Now that he had obtained his mana body, Shifeng opened his legacy skill menu to check for new skills. There were over 20 Tier 3 skills available, and every one of them required at least 20 legacy skill points to learn. Some of the more powerful skills even required 50 points. Players that had failed to collect legacy skill points from unconventional means would be fortunate to learn 2 Tier 3 skills upon reaching Tier 3. Fortunately, that wasn't the case for Shifeng. With the points he had saved up thus far and the points he just obtained, he had nearly 100 legacy skill points to spend. Shifeng immediately spent 40 legacy skill points to upgrade Blade Liberation and Blade Awakening to Tier 3. He then spent another 50 points to learn Void Slash, the strongest skill a Tier 3 Blade Saint could learn. Void Slash, action type, requires Sword Tier 3, proficiency needed to upgrade to Tier 4, 0/100, 000, manipulate the power of the void to execute 6 slashes. Each slash carries 150% of user's strength and causes 200% divine damage. User may transfer to the location of any of the 6 slashes. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU cooldown. 8 seconds. Not only did Tier 3 skills possess greater raw power than Tier 2 skills, but they were also more capable of injuring high-tiered monsters. However, Tier 3 skills had very long cooldowns. Those with immense power and short cooldowns, like Void Slash, were exceptionally rare. Normally, players tried to learn several Tier 3 skills and link them together to make up for the long cooldowns. However, with Void Slash alone, Shifeng could exhibit nearly the full potential DPS of a Tier 3 player. Now that I've reached Tier 3, it's time I lead everyone to a level 100 neutral map. With his new strength, Shifeng was confident that he could eliminate a level 100 Great Lord, even without Anna and Kite's help. Chapter 23:14, Tier 3 Powerhouse. When Shifeng left the library, he made his way toward the Adventurers Association. Although he was now officially a Tier 3 player, he still needed to register his achievement at the Adventurers Association to gain the appropriate certification. Gaining Tier 3 certification at the Adventurers Association was very important. Not only would it allow players to accept high-ranked quests appropriate for their tier, but they would also be acknowledged as true powerhouses in God's domain. They would then qualify to raid the monarch bosses in neutral maps and become the area's ruler. This was also why the various powers had been so desperate to get their members to Tier 3 in the past. The Tier 3 turning point didn't simply differentiate experts from each other. It also determined whether or not one qualified to become a true overlord. After all, the various powers' true battlefield for hegemony in God's domain was in level 100+ neutral maps. Initially, Shifeng had planned to establish a guild town in a level 100 neutral map and slowly, steadily progressing towards lordship, but now that the planar passages had opened and adventurer alliances had formed sooner than he had expected, he needed a more efficient plan. The planar passages activation hadn't just accelerated independent players' leveling speed. It had done so for the various powers as well. Now, he didn't have as much time to conquer level 100+ neutral maps. Zero Wing wasn't like the various superpowers. It lacked the manpower and resources to secure a foundation in level 100 neutral maps as quickly as superpowers could. Moreover, Zero Wing wouldn't be able to secure as much territory as the various superpowers. To establish a guild town in a level 100 neutral map, the ruling power would need to station a large number of players in the map long-term. Level 100 neutral maps were very far away from kingdoms and empires, considered free zones that were outside of any kingdom or empire's protection. In addition, NPCs weren't particularly interested in visiting these guild towns due to the neutral map's harsh environments. As a result, very few NPCs would apply as soldiers, and those that did would ask for exorbitant salaries. Hence, unlike in guild towns within kingdoms, empires, and low-level neutral maps, players had to handle the majority of their guild town's defenses in level 100 neutral maps. This was also why guilds that wanted to secure a foothold in level 100+ neutral maps needed to upgrade their towns into guild cities as quickly as possible. They'd only be able to solidify their rule over the map with a guild city. After all, not only would guilds have to face monster assaults, but they'd also have to deal with enemy powers. Establishing rule in a level 100+ neutral map was already an intense challenge for guilds, and it would be especially difficult for Zero Wing, which lacked certain foundational aspects. The only solution Shifeng could think of was to become a lord. As a lord, players would have full authority over the territory they controlled, and they'd be able to recruit various neutral race NPCs. A lord could also establish their own knight division. The NPCs players could recruit for a knight division were different from the NPC soldiers one could hire to protect a guild town. They were more akin to personal guards, and players could recruit these knights from various kingdoms and empires, nurturing them as they did personal guards. Once a player became a lord of a land, they could recruit up to 5,000 knights. Although that didn't seem like a lot, these knights were bona fide NPCs and would be immensely helpful when defending a guild's territories. While Shifeng traveled toward the Adventurers Association, he called Blackie. "Blackie, how are things coming along in the Northern Fortress?" Shifeng asked. He had spent quite a lot of time completing his promotion quest. Although he had told Blackie and the others not to contact him unless something important happened, and he hadn't received any calls, he refused to believe that Dragonheart Island's various superpowers were content to sit by and watch while Zero Wing earned a ton of profits from its newfound gold mine. The fortress's player population has already reached 1,500,000, and we're earning roughly 14,000 ancient gold per day. Dragonheart Island's various powers are practically dying with envy, especially Warblood. Because of the Northern Fortress's benefits, almost no one is visiting Warblood's Rock Nest Fortress. Blood Oath is likely losing his mind right now, Blackie said, chuckling. Also, as per your instructions, I purchased a plot of land near the World Tower a few days ago, and I bought a guild residence in Dragonheart City's inner area, so our guild has a temporary resting point in the city. Hearing how much Blackie had purchased over the last few days, Shifeng sighed ruefully. He had considered several thousand ancient gold an astronomical sum in his past life, yet now he earned 14,000 ancient gold each day from the Northern Fortress alone. It was no wonder why the various superpowers had fought so hard to capture the Gravity Mountain Range's fortresses in the past. However, Dragonheart Island's powers have been developing rapidly due to the planar passages opening. Quite a few superpowers now have their own small fortresses, and based on the reports I've received, Warblood, Starlink, and 13 Thrones are marching toward the Southern Tower Medium Fortress, Blackie said worriedly. If they're successful, we'll likely see a significant decrease to the Northern Fortress's income. It certainly won't benefit our development in Dragonheart City. Why don't we capture a few more fortresses, Guild Leader? Zero Wing now had quite a bit of manpower in the Gravity Mountain Range. With Phoenix Rain's subordinates protecting the Northern Fortress, they had enough strength to capture the other fortresses. The Gravity Mountain Range only had so many fortresses. If they captured a few more, they should be able to maintain 70% to 80% of their profits, even if the Northern Fortress's income decreased. Let the other powers fight for the fortresses. We only need the Northern Fortress, Shifeng said, chuckling. Also, notify all of the main force members to gather in White River City. We'll be heading to a level 100 neutral map. That's where we really need to be right now. The Gravity Mountain Range was an excellent place for players to grind for levels and resources right now, but it couldn't help players rise to prominence. A level 100 neutral map? Blackie's eyes glowed when he heard Shifeng's plan. Alright, I'll notify them right away. The Gravity Mountain Range had bountiful resources, but it paled in comparison to unexplored level 100 neutral maps. Moreover, Zero Wing's main force members would benefit more from grinding in level 100 neutral maps at their levels than they would from grinding in the Gravity Mountain Range. After disconnecting the call, Blackie began to gather Zero Wing's main force members and head toward White River City. Meanwhile, Shifeng arrived at the Adventurers Association. The Adventurers Association was quite lively at the moment, with just as many visiting players as the city's auction house. The auction house wasn't the only construction that transformed after White River City's promotion. The Adventurers Association had similarly undergone a metamorphosis and now contained a lot more NPCs who visited to consign quests. Some of these quests included those in high-level neutral maps and escort quests to the kingdom's borders. If one were lucky, they might even find crusade quests to slay monsters in neutral maps. With the opportunity to earn both equipment and money available, the Adventurers Association had become a hub for many independent players. As Shi Feng entered the first-floor hall, he was greeted by the sight of a ton of level 90-plus players. Now, not even the Adventurers Associations in imperial capitals could compare to the prosperity the association in White River City enjoyed. Pushing his way through the crowd, Shi Feng quickly made his way to the second-floor hall and applied for his certification as a Tier 3 adventurer. After completing the process in a VIP reception room, the Adventurers Association officially recognized Shi Feng as a Tier 3 powerhouse. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Lord Bronze Legatee, is there anything else I can help you with today? The elven woman who had received him asked, smiling. I wish to see the Monarch Crusade quests for Cold Spring Forest, Shi Feng declared. Cold Spring Forest was the closest level 100 neutral map to Star Moon Kingdom, and it was one of the few level 100 maps with a relatively comfortable environment. Many Tier 2 players had grinded in the Cold Spring Forest after reaching level 100 in the past, including Shi Feng himself. However, the various superpowers had taken control of the map's 6 regions by the time he had reached Tier 3. Now that he was the first Tier 3 player in the game, he couldn't miss this opportunity. Chapter 23:15 Ice Dragon Heathwaite. After Shi Feng made his request, the Elven Administrator made a quick trip to the Adventurers Association's reference room and returned with 7 parchment scrolls. Lord Bronze Legatee, here are the crusade quests you've requested. Here is the information on all 7 of Cold Spring Forest's monarchs, the Elven Administrator said as she placed the scrolls on the table. 7 monarchs? Shi Feng was a little surprised when he saw the 7 ancient scrolls. In God's domain, only one monarch would manage a region, and as far as he knew, Cold Spring Forest only consisted of 6 regions. This meant that there should only be 6 monarchs. He had never heard of a 7th. My lord, I have to remind you that you may only accept one crusade quest. Whether or you succeed or fail, you may only accept another crusade quest after 10 days. The materials needed to create the transfer stones are quite expensive as well. Please, choose wisely, the Elven Administrator explained. Shi Feng had already known all of that, and nodding silently, he began to inspect the scrolls. He wanted to know if the information he had obtained during his previous life had changed. If Cold Spring Forest monarchs had massively changed due to his reincarnation, his plans would come to an abrupt end. A monarch was no ordinary field boss. They might not be as powerful as level 100+ world bosses, but they were considered superior mythic monsters. They could kill Tier 3 players as effortlessly as squishing ants. Trying to raid such a boss with a Tier 3,100-man team the same level would be futile. Players needed to rely on special means to raid a monarch. After browsing through the information for 10 or so minutes, Shi Feng breathed a sigh of relief. Thank goodness everything's the same as I remembered. The only difference is the extra monarch. But even as he sighed, his gaze was glued on the extra monarch's information. The 7th monarch was part of the legendary dragon race, the Ice Dragon, Heathwaite. Meanwhile, the region Heathwaite ruled over was the Cold Spring Canyon, which was located in the Cold Spring Forest's central region. Cold Spring Canyon had been quite famous in the past in God's domain due to the extremely rare Arctic water it produced. Arctic water was one of the few items in God's domain that could improve a player's adaptability to their environment. The effects might not be astounding, and the item was useless to players with gold mana bodies or better, but it would be tremendously helpful to Tier 2 players when they challenged their Tier 3 promotion quests. This was why so many powers had fought for control of the Cold Spring Canyon during Shi Feng's previous life. Shi Feng had never dreamed that someone could actually rule over the Cold Spring Canyon. Without any more hesitation, Shi Feng accepted the crusade quest to hunt the Ice Dragon, Heathwaite. Are you sure you wish to accept this quest, Lord Bronze Legatee? We only have one transfer stone connected to the Ice Dragon's lair left. If you fail this quest, you will not be able to accept it again in the future, the Elven administrator warned when Shi Feng selected the crusade quest that had remained untouched for over a century. "I'll take it," Shi Feng said with determination. He'd have a high chance of success with hunting the other monarchs thanks to his memories, but the Cold Spring Canyon was simply too valuable to give up. Technically, he could hunt one of the other 6 monarchs first and raid the Ice Dragon after the 10-day wait, but covering one area would be quite taxing on the guild with Zero Wing's current standards. Zero Wing simply couldn't manage 2 areas. Since he was limited to a single area, he had to choose the best option available. Even if he failed, he could prevent another power from obtaining the Cold Spring Canyon. The cost to teleport to Heathwaite's lair is quite high. You will have to pay 10,000 gold and 20,000 magic crystals as a deposit. If you complete the quest, we will return the deposit in full, as well as pay you your deserved remuneration. If you fail, however, your deposit will be forfeit, the Elven administrator said seriously. That's fine. Shi Feng had already prepared for this cost. He handed the Elven administrator the deposit in exchange for a gray-white crystal. This crystal was none other than the transfer stone for the Ice Dragon's lair. After obtaining the transfer stone, Shi Feng made his way to the Candlelight trading firm to retrieve some of the dark gold weapons that had been stored there. He then upgraded the Abyssal Blade to level 90, which was as high as he could upgrade the magic weapon right now. Level 95 weapons were still considered a luxury, not to mention level 95 dark gold weapons. Fortunately, the Abyssal Blade's attack power and attributes were only slightly lower than those of a level 100 epic weapon, despite the fact that it was only a level 90 magic weapon. The Abyssal Blade would be more than enough for Shi Feng's needs. Shi Feng then visited the Candlelight trading firm's second basement floor, which was where he stored his most important items. A guild residence was quite secure, but the Candlelight trading firm in White River City was many times safer than Zero Wing's guild hall. At this point, only Tier 4 players would have any hope of breaking past the shop's defenses. At this moment, an NPC guard stood before the warehouse on the second basement floor. He was a level 100, Tier 3 fine gold guard, and unless one had permission, not even a Tier 3 Apex expert would get past him. The Candlelight trading firm's defenses were impressively strict. With the help of the Grandmaster Forger Celiora, Shi Feng had previously recast the disintegration armor, a piece of legendary equipment, yet despite being unfinished, it was too powerful for Shi Feng to use. Moreover, carrying the disintegration armor on him wasn't safe, so he had stored it in the Candlelight trading firm's underground warehouse. First, he didn't want to risk losing it, even if the chance of it dropping upon his death was negligible. Second, even after recasting it, the disintegration armor's aura would still attract ores, especially powerful high-tiered ores. If he had attracted a powerful ore's attention as a Tier 2 player, he would have been helpless. Furthermore, he couldn't equip it yet. He had coveted legendary items for a long time. He had heard countless stories of players who owned a legendary item in his previous life. There were tales of Tier 4 players defeating Tier 5 players and Tier 5 players slaying Tier 6 God-ranked players. One player had even soloed a Tier 5 dragon. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yet, the piece of legendary equipment he had gone to great lengths to obtain was an unfinished product, and its minimum use requirement was Tier 3. To make matters worse, he hadn't even been able to inspect its attribute panel until he had reached Tier 3. Holding on to the disintegration armor would have only frustrated him. Now that he had finally reached Tier 3 and met the minimum requirements to equip the disintegration armor, it was time to retrieve it. With a piece of legendary equipment, defeating the Ice Dragon, Heathwaite, would be far easier. Legendary items could, after all, allow players to transcend tiers, and as a Tier 3 player, he should be able to contend with a Tier 4 Ice Dragon with the disintegration armor equipped. Once he entered the warehouse and arrived before the disintegration armor, Shi Feng chanted an incantation to release the seal protecting it. As soon as the seal faded, crimson energy pulsed away from the pitch-black chest piece, spreading. A pressure that would even make Tier 2 experts uncomfortable began to fill the warehouse. As the disintegration armor's aura swept over him, Shi Feng felt his blood begin to boil as bloodlust wormed its way into his mind. Taking several seconds to suppress the maddening feeling, Feng tapped on the disintegration armor to inspect its attribute panel. Chapter 23:16, Armor of Legends. Space itself faintly began to crumble as it was exposed to the disintegration armor's disintegration power. Despite having reached Tier 3, the moment Feng touched the armor, he could feel the mana in his right arm vibrate and felt signs of it beginning to break down. Mana dispersal? The sensation in Feng's right arm stunned him. He hadn't had a particularly clear idea of what the disintegration armor had done to him when he had been Tier 2. He had only felt a strong, stifling pressure from the armor. Now that he was Tier 3, however, he could sense the disintegration power blocking and destroying the mana within him. After a slight touch, the mana density in his right arm had significantly decreased. If he maintained contact with the disintegration armor for a long period, it would utterly destroy the mana that coated his body. Losing this mana coating didn't seem like a major problem, but it would deal a fatal blow to Tier 3 players and above. After reaching Tier 3, a player's mana body would drive every action they took in God's domain. If their mana body couldn't conduct mana, they'd be as good as crippled. The mana body played a crucial role when players used Tier 3 skills and spells. Without a working mana body, activating those abilities would be nearly impossible. Naturally, the difference between the combat power a Tier 3 player could display with Tier 3 skills and spells and a Tier 3 player who couldn't would be obvious at a glance. Once Feng had tapped on the disintegration armor, its attribute panel appeared before him. Disintegration armor, unfinished product. Chest plate, legendary rank, equipment requirement. Strength 9,000, Agility 7,000. Tier requirement. Tier 3 Divine Defense plus 15,000, affected by player's level. All basic attributes plus 1,000, affected by player's level and tier. Physique increased by 100%, affected by player's tier. When equipped, Strength increased by 120%, Agility increased by 100%, and Endurance increased by 100%. All resistance plus 300, magic resistance increased by 40%, mana body's effects increased by 50%, ignore levels plus 30, all item level requirements reduced by 10 levels. Additional passive skill, Disintegration Body, reduces the damage from Tier 3 or below attacks by 70%, reduces damage from Tier 4 or above attacks by 40%, immune to all control effects, weakens stiffening effects by 70%, and increases reaction speed by 20%. Additional active skill 1, Disintegration Field, disintegrates all skills and spells within a 100-yard radius. Skills and spells at Tier 2 and below will be nullified, while skills and spells above Tier 2 will be weakened by 60%. All entities within range will suffer a 40% reduction to basic attributes, physique, and stamina, in addition to a 400% increase to their stamina and concentration consumption rates. No cooldown. Additional active skill 2, Disintegration Power, gathers all of the disintegration armor's power and temporarily sacrifice all of its attributes to upgrade user by 1 tier for 60 seconds. Cooldown, 12 hours, cannot be stacked with skills and spells of similar effect. The disintegration armor is a divine armor that the Or Empire's founding emperor had created with various divine items. This armor had been destroyed during a battle against gods. The disintegration armor has recovered a portion of its original strength after Celiora recast the chest piece using a blood contract. Due to the armor's disintegration power, the armor's attributes suffer an 80% reduction when equipped. If equipped by the blood contractor, the armor's attributes will only be reduced by 50%. God crystals required to repair the disintegration armor fully, 0/10. Amazing! Feng's eyes glowed as he read the disintegration armor's attribute panel. Before this, he hadn't had a clear idea of what a true legendary item's attributes would look like. He had only heard of legendary items during his previous life. He hadn't actually seen a real legendary item's attribute panel since anyone with such an item had rightfully kept a tight lid on its abilities. Although the disintegration armor was an unfinished product, it was the strongest piece of equipment he had ever laid eyes on. Even Gentle Snow's fragmented legendary ranked 7 Luminaries battle armor was far weaker than this chest piece. The 7 Luminaries battle armor had originally been a legendary item, but after taking significant damage, its rank had fallen. And yet, despite being a damaged piece of armor as well, the Disintegration armor was leagues stronger than the 7 Luminaries battle armor in all aspects. The fact that the Disintegration armor granted divine defense, rather than a simple boost to ordinary defense, was particularly astounding. This meant that even skills and spells that dealt true damage wouldn't be as effective against the Disintegration armor's wearer. It would also reduce lower-tiered players' damage, and higher-tiered players wouldn't be able to deal any additional damage due to their tier advantage. Divine Defense was the highest grade of defense in God's domain. It's a pity that the armor is so badly damaged. Even if I equip it, I'll only exhibit a fraction of its true might. If I could display the Disintegration armor's full power, dealing with the Ice Dragon would be a piece of cake, Shi Feng thought. The Disintegration power's instability limited the armor's true strength. At the armor's peak, Shi Feng could likely defeat the Mythic-ranked Ice Dragon head-on with the additional 100% physique and 120% strength. Even so, Shi Feng was overjoyed that he could finally equip the Disintegration armor. A piece of legendary equipment. Countless players, including Apex experts, dreamed of equipping such an item. Legendary items were simply too rare in God's domain. Just obtaining a single clue that might lead to one required an astronomical amount of manpower and resources. In some cases, these clues would only lead to a fragment of a legendary item. Players would then have to find the remaining fragments and invest even more resources to repair it. Unless one were ridiculously lucky or had particularly powerful support, getting their hands on a legendary item would be utterly impossible. Now, Shi Feng finally had a legendary item of his own, and he could even equip it now. The Disintegration armor's attributes might be halved, but it was still slightly more powerful than a piece of fragmented legendary equipment. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Shi Feng immediately equipped the Disintegration armor. The 9,000 strength and 7,000 agility were incredibly difficult requirements to meet. Even a Tier 3 player in full, top-tier equipment would have to wait until level 120 to fulfill them, but it wasn't an issue for Shi Feng. Not only did he have an advanced bloodline, but he also wielded one of the 10 great saint legacies. Furthermore, he carried a magic weapon and multiple fragmented legendary items. Meeting the two requirements at level 100 was actually quite easy for him. The instant Shi Feng equipped the Disintegration armor, he felt power course through him. His basic attributes skyrocketed, and his perception considerably improved. Even his mind felt far clearer than before. If he fought Urdia, a titled, Tier 3 heroic spirit, in his current condition, he'd have a high chance of defeating the undead. It's about time to leave. Glancing at the time, Shi Feng realized it was time to meet up with Blackie and the others. He activated the Nightwalker's Cape's Nightwalker skill to conceal the Disintegration armor's aura and information before heading toward White River City's teleportation hall. Chapter 23:17 Shadowless Empire White River City's teleportation hall. Once in the teleportation hall, Shi Feng made his way to one of the high-class bars on the 3rd floor. Blackie and the others had been waiting for some time now. When they noticed Shi Feng enter the establishment, they stood, surprised. Yen Tianxing and Iluofei were particularly shocked as their guild leader pulled their attention away from their 10 gold bottles of 5-colored fruit wine. So, this is a Tier 3 class? Blackie had already informed the group that Shi Feng had left to challenge his Tier 3 promotion quest, and none of them had been particularly surprised. Shi Feng had already reached level 100. So it was expected that he'd challenge his promotion quest. Although Shi Feng's Nightwalker's Cape concealed his aura, it couldn't hide the fact that the ambient mana actively flowed toward him. God's domain did have weapons and equipment that would attract mana to their user, but those items generally only increase the mana density around the player. However, despite so much mana flowing toward Shi Feng, Yen Tianxing, whose senses were quite sharp, and Iluofei, who was a magical class player and only a step away from reaching the domain realm, recognized that the mana density around Shifeng hadn't actually increased. It felt as if the swordsman were a black hole, steadily devouring the ambient mana. Mana was the root of all in God's domain. A player's physical and mental condition, skills, and spells were all closely tied to mana. As players at the peak of God's domain, Xianxia and Luofei had spent a considerable amount of time researching the game's mechanics, especially the relationship between mana and a player's virtual body. Players constantly absorbed mana from their environments, and as players' physiques grew stronger, they'd absorb more mana. This was why areas with thin or no mana were considered forbidden lands. As a Tier 3 player, Shifeng's mana absorption was astounding. If the mana that flowed into Tier 2 players was like a small creek, the mana flowing into Shifeng was a raging river. "Everyone's here, guild leader. We can set off when you're ready," Blackie excitedly reported. Thanks to the Northern Fortress, Zero Wing's overall strength had increased considerably. Not only did the Northern Fortress provide the huge ancient gold profits, but it also gave players a place where they could rapidly grow stronger. By this point, Zero Wing had explored multiple ancient ruins in the Gravity Mountain Range's northern region, securing plenty of precious treasure. The guild's main force members had also reached level 97 and 98 and had upgraded most of their equipment with level 95 dark gold equipment. However, their combat standards had improved far faster than their levels and equipment. As many as 26 main force members had now reached the Truth Realm. Xianxia and Luofei had even reached the Ascension Realm. In addition, Alluring Summer, Silent Blade, Shadow Sword, Stubborn Bone, and Zhao Yueru had entered the Flowing Water Realm thanks to Unyielding Soul's legacy training slots. Seeing how much his comrades had improved, Shifeng was a little surprised. He hadn't expected them to grow so strong so quickly. Now, Zero Wing's main force was likely only a little weaker than Superpower's main forces. If Fire Dance and the others could make some progress in the Tower of Four Gods, Zero Wing's main force might even be able to stand toe-to-toe with the various Superpowers' main forces. "All right, let's go." Shifeng nodded as he joined the team. He led everyone to a teleportation array and traveled to the border town closest to the Cold Spring Forest. He then used the Seven Luminaries Ring's spatial gate to transport the team the rest of the way. Cold Spring Forest was a level 100 neutral map, as well as a junction to other level 100+ neutral maps. Thus, it was quite far from civilization. Players would have to cross over a dozen large maps to reach the Cold Spring Forest from Starmoon Kingdom. Getting there was especially troublesome without a flying mount. Of course, Shifeng had the Thunder Eagle and the Seven Luminaries Ring. After teleporting multiple times, Shifeng and his team finally arrived before the cave that led to the Cold Spring Forest. The Cold Spring Forest was meant to help players transition from Tier 2 to Tier 3, unlike other level 100 neutral maps with harsh environments. Not only was this a comfortable area for players to grind, but it was also home to a large number of ancient races. The forest was also under an ancient seal's protection, so players would have to defeat the map's guardian boss and remove the seal before they could explore the map. Even with a flying mount, entering the map was impossible without completing those tasks. "Guild leader, I see people." Minor Wind, who had long since reached both the Refinement Realm and Truth Realm, quickly discovered players' tracks as they arrived before the cave. "It looks like there's a lot of them. I'm guessing these tracks are from a 200-man team. Others have already found this place?" Shifeng was stunned. Although this cave wasn't as dangerous as a level 100 neutral map, the monsters within were still level 97+ lords and great lords. Quite a few grand lords wandered within the cave as well. Surviving here was no easy task. In addition, the cave was particularly dark, suppressing players' 5 senses to a certain degree. A 100-man team of current experts wouldn't last more than 10 minutes inside the cave. Even a superpower's main force would struggle to get through. There were simply too many monsters, especially since the cave should still be largely unexplored. "Guild leader, should we head inside?" Blackie asked. They were trying to maintain a level of secrecy. If they encountered other players, news of their operation would spread. Although they were only heading out to explore a level 100 neutral map, which shouldn't be much of a problem, they couldn't guarantee that other powers wouldn't try to take advantage of their operation. No need to worry. Let's just go, Shifeng said, shaking his head. Even if other powers learned that they were exploring the Cold Spring Forest, they couldn't cause any problems for Zero Wing's team. Other players weren't even guaranteed to get through the cave and into the forest, much less take advantage of the operation. Following which, with Kola Yuwumian and Turtledove led the way into the cave. Visibility was poor in the dimly lit cave. Even Tier 2 players could only see up to 200 yards away, and dodging ranged attacks from multiple directions would be particularly challenging in the cave's narrow, maze-like structure. Fortunately, Zero Wing's main force members had trained in the Extraordinary Tower, so they coped with the cave monsters' ambushes relatively well. With an MT like Kola leading the way, the team had little issue pushing through the cave quickly. They didn't have to come to a halt to deal with the monsters. The cave had 2 floors, and after 3 hours, Shifeng and his comrades finally reached the 2nd floor. This was also where they'd find the Guardian boss. Unlike the 1st floor, the 2nd floor was an open canyon. It was so large that a large team wouldn't have to worry about needing room for their usual formations in battle. Moreover, the 2nd floor was much brighter than the 1st. However, the suppression on players' senses had increased in exchange. Less than 30 minutes after reaching the 2nd floor, Shifeng and his team heard explosions and noticed dazzling lights at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel led to a cavern, which contained a town. Zero Wing's main force found a 200-man team clearing out the demonkin soldiers and guards that guarded the town, while gradually approaching an ancient giant in the town center. Every player on the 200-man team was level 96 or above, and they all wore a dark mark on their foreheads. They also radiated a faint, black glow. Even as they fought the High Lord-ranked demonkin soldiers one-on-one, these players had an overwhelming advantage. Not even the Great Lord-ranked demonkin guards could halt these players' advance for more than a moment. As for the ancient giant in the town center, it stood at over a dozen meters tall and had 6 arms. Each of the giant's hands held a pitch-black spear, and it loomed like the ancient god of destruction. Demonkin Soldier, Dark Creature, High Lord, Level 98 HP 49, 000, 000/49, 000, 000, Demonkin Guard, Dark Creature, Great Lord, Level 99 HP 88, 000, 000/88, 000, 000, Purgatory Giant, Dark Giant, Mythic. Level 99 HP 460, 000, 000/460, 000, 000, Guild Leader. They look like Shadowless Empire's members. It's an adventurer team from the Shadow World, Blackie said, quickly discerning the players' identities once he saw them. Shadowless Empire? It's no wonder why those 2 are here. Shifeng thought, spotting a familiar man and woman at the lead of the small army. Blackie's comment reminded him of exactly who those 2 were. Shadowless Empire had been a very famous superpower during his previous life. It had taken over the Shadow World even before the planar passages had opened. With the excellent leveling resources and special legacies the Shadow World contained, Shadowless Empire had flourished wonderfully after arriving on the main continent. 2 of Shadowless Empire's members, in particular, had forced the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion into a disadvantageous position during a contest for territory in level 100+ neutral maps. Those 2 were the same man and woman that led Shadowless Empire's 200-man team. They were the Dark Assassin, Vastlock, and the Shadowless Ranger, Night Reader. These 2 players hadn't reached the Domain Realm Empire before moving to God's Domain's main continent. Yet even Domain Realm experts had been terrified of their assassination capabilities. Once they had reached the Domain Realm, they had been akin to demon kings in the dark. Those 2 had been responsible for plenty of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's losses, even going as far as stealing one of the pavilion's territories. Meanwhile, shortly after Zero Wing's members discovered Shadowless Empire's team, Shadowless Empire's members noticed them as well. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You, Commander, those are Zero Wing's members. Should we get rid of them? A level 96 Dark Berserker asked, making a throat-cutting gesture as he glanced at Zero Wing's main force. I hadn't thought Zero Wing would reach this place. It's no wonder why everyone's insisted that Starlink and the various superpowers can't seem to deal with the guild, Night Reader said, chuckling. Night Reader was a slender woman with vibrant red hair. She wore epic chainmail and wielded an ancient, crimson bow as well. It's a pity that their era in God's domain has come to an end. Zero Wing is simply wasting its time by coming here. Because the Shadow world lacked top-tier weapons and equipment, Shadowless Empire's equipment standards had been lacking when they had first arrived on the main continent. However, their equipment standards had undergone a qualitative transformation rather quickly, and Shadowless Empire's members had caught up with the main continent's players. With their advantage in terms of legacies, levels, and combat standards, not even the various superpowers with vast foundations were a match for Shadowless Empire now. As for the main continent's non-superpowers, they were utterly helpless before Shadowless Empire's strength. When he heard Night Reader's comment, the bald youth leading the team, Vastlock, nodded his agreement. Ignore them and prioritize killing the Purgatory Giant. They'll know what to do once they realize the difference between our strengths, Vastlock said. He returned to commanding his team as they advanced on the Purgatory Giant. Chapter 23:18 Sword rises after Vastlock declared his decision. Shadowless Empire's 200-man team accelerated their advance toward the Purgatory Giant, completely ignoring Shifeng and the others' existence. These people really don't care about us at all. Yen Tianxing could not help but shake his head and chuckle when he saw Shadowless Empire's members' nonchalant reaction toward Zero Wing's arrival. Normally, when players came across other players out in the fields, especially when they were raiding a boss, they would give out a reminder or warning to the approaching players. However, Shadowless Empire's members simply treated Zero Wing's team as if it were air and did not even bother trying to make contact. The only explanation for such a reaction was that Shadowless Empire had deemed them to be no threat and not worthy of any attention whatsoever. Guild leader, are we really not going to make a move? Blackie asked as he looked at the distant Purgatory Giant. He did not particularly care about Shadowless Empire's treatment of them. However, since the guardian boss of this cave served as the key to the Cold Spring Forest, its loot might provide them with some help once they entered the neutral map. We're only traveling toward the Cold Spring Forest. Having someone to open up a path for us is a good thing, Shifeng said, chuckling. He then instructed everyone to get some rest first. He had no intention of snatching the boss from Shadowless Empire at all. The Purgatory Giant was indeed a very important boss. After killing it, not only would players gain access to the Cold Spring Forest, but they would also obtain a special item called Purgatory Core. When activated, the Purgatory Core would create a natural barrier with a 200-yard radius that would help players adapt to level 100 neutral maps. The barrier's effects were similar to Arctic Water, except that Arctic Water was only effective for one player while the Purgatory Core applied to a specific area. 4 Tier 2 teams looking to grind in level 100+ neutral maps. The Purgatory Core was a very useful item. Killing the Purgatory Giant provided no other benefits aside from these two. Meanwhile, his goal was to kill the ice dragon Heathwaite and occupy the Cold Spring Canyon. To him, the Purgatory Core held no meaning. After all, once he occupied the Cold Spring Canyon, he could obtain Arctic Water much more easily. At that time, let alone a 100-man team, even strengthening a 1,000-man team wouldn't be difficult. I guess you're right. Blackie nodded, as he found Shifeng's words reasonable. He then sat down on the ground and started recovering his stamina and concentration. The Purgatory Giant was a level 99 mythic boss. Moreover, it belonged to the giant race. Its life rating was considerably high, so raiding it would not be easy. Since Shadowless Empire was willing to raid it for them, they could use this opportunity to conserve their strength for the Cold Spring Forest. While Zero Wing's members rested in a distant location, Shadowless Empire's members, who were only 500 yards away from the Purgatory Giant now, also noticed what Zero Wing's members were doing. It seems these people are quite smart. Had they dared try to snatch the boss, I'd make sure they got a good beating. A level 96 Dark Berserker said, smirking when he saw Zero Wings members sitting down and resting. I doubt that's the case. I bet they want to use us to test the Purgatory Giant's prowess, so that they can have an easier time rating it afterward, Night Reader said as she glanced at Shifeng and the others, a bright smile blooming on her face. It's a pity that they're looking down on us too much. Shadowless Empire was the ruler of the entire Shadow world. Its capabilities were far beyond anything the main continent's various superpowers could imagine. Although the Shadow world was only the size of a kingdom, as one of the higher standard otherworlds, it possessed resources that many superpowers coveted. However, despite the superpowers' numerous attempts to seize the Shadow world, Shadowless Empire always emerged victorious. Alright, focus. The boss has already sensed us. Everyone, get ready. Vastlock suddenly shouted when he saw the Purgatory Giant opening its eyes. The Purgatory Giant's awakening immediately panicked the wandering Demonkin soldiers and Demonkin guards. The moment the Purgatory Giant opened its eyes, everyone present felt a horrific aura wash over them, even Zero Wings members, who sat several thousand yards away. Based on its aura, the Purgatory Giant was definitely much stronger than ordinary mythic monsters. Moreover, space within a 500-yard radius of the Purgatory Giant started changing upon the Guardian boss's awakening, the gravel on the ground shattering. After awakening, the Purgatory Giant immediately advanced toward Shadowless Empire's members and thrust its 6 spears at them, the spears tearing apart the space they passed through. Just as the 6 spears were about to reach Shadowless Empire's members, 6 shield-bearing Dark Knights jumped forward and met the spears in battle, the bodies of these Dark Knights radiating a bright, black light while the dark mark on their foreheads glowed a faint crimson. A series of explosions echoed throughout the entire tattered town. After receiving the Purgatory Giant's spear, each of the 6 Dark Knights stumbled only 3 or 4 steps back before stabilizing their bodies. They also lost only 25% or so of their HP, which was quickly regenerated thanks to the rear-line healers. When the Purgatory Giant started launching its second round of attacks, the 6 Dark Knights had yet to recover their balance. At this time, however, 6 more Dark Knights emerged from Shadowless Empire's to block the Purgatory Giant's spears. Like so, the 2 parties of MTs took turns receiving the Purgatory Giant's attacks, their coordination perfect. Due to their perfect execution and timing, the 12 MTs prevented the Purgatory Giant from inflicting any harm on the rest of the team. Start! Vastlock shouted. Upon hearing Vastlock's command, the Cursemancers at the rear line immediately cast Dark Devour. In the next moment, a black puddle formed beneath the Purgatory Giant's feet, the black liquid continuously crawling up the giant and threatening to consume it. Although the spell did not deal any damage, it applied a significant speed debuff. This situation instantly reduced the pressure on the team. Immediately after, Shadowless Empire's members started bombarding the boss in a frenzy. Taking the lead to attack, Night Reader drew her Crimson Bow and sent a Crimson Light Pillar shooting at the Purgatory Giant. Minus 331,564. With just one attack, Night Reader halted the movement of one of the Purgatory Giant's arms. At this time, Vastlock had also made his way to the Purgatory Giant's back and stabbed his 2 pitch-black, glowing daggers at the Mythic boss. The instant the 2 daggers touched the Purgatory Giant's skin, 2 black beams pierced through the boss, each beam causing over minus 200,000 damage. The basic attributes of these people are high. Every one of them is like a great lord. This is especially true for that assassin and ranger. Those 2 are most likely superior to great lords of the same level in terms of basic attributes. Moreover, these people can perfectly combine their combat techniques with their skills and spells. It's no wonder they're so confident in taking down the Purgatory Giant, Yen Tianxing praised as he watched Shadowless Empire's members fight. At this stage of the game, the majority of the main continent's experts were still experimenting with combining combat techniques with skills and spells. However, Shadowless Empire's members had already accomplished this feat, allowing their Tier 2 skills and spells to undergo a qualitative improvement. Just 30 minutes later, the Purgatory Giant finally went berserk. Shadowless Empire's members started activating their berserk skills, one after another, in response. When Vastlock and Night Reader activated their berserk skills, without even activating twofold berserk, their basic attributes already reached the standard of mythic monsters. As a result, they managed to endure the Purgatory Giant's berserk phase and eventually slew the mythic boss. Along with the Purgatory Giant's death, the magic barrier that protected the Cold Spring Forest started crumbling. The seal on the cave leading to the Cold Spring Forest was also removed. Meanwhile, beyond the cave, one could now see a snow-covered forest. After killing the Purgatory Giant, Shadowless Empire's members did not rest for long. As soon as they finished collecting the boss's loot, they made their way into the Cold Spring Forest. As they left, they glanced at the distant Zero Wing members with gleeful expressions. Ha! Zero Wing's members must be dumbfounded after seeing us defeat the Purgatory Giant. The Dark Berserker carrying a two-handed axe laughed. Although we got to show them the gap in strength between us, they now get to enter the Cold Spring Forest without putting in any effort, Night Reader grumbled. There's nothing wrong with letting them gain some advantage. Zero Wing is Starmoon Kingdom's #1 guild. Its influence also reaches multiple kingdoms and empires. If we want to establish a foothold in the main continent quickly, we can make use of Zero Wing's strength, Vastlock said. After Vastlock's words, Shadowless Empire's members no longer said anything. Instead, they simply focused on traveling to the Cold Spring Forest's inner area. Roughly 5 minutes after Shadowless Empire's members entered the forest, a deafening roar suddenly echoed throughout the forest. How is this possible? A grim look surfaced on Night Reader's face when a group of fully armed dragonkins suddenly emerged from the snowy forest ahead. However, what shocked her the most were the numbers and strength of these dragonkin. Dragonkin Fighter, Dragonkin, Lord, level 100 HP 63, 000, 000/63, 000, 000, Dragonkin Captain, Dragonkin High Lord, level 101 HP 135, 000, 000/135, 000, 000, Dragonkin Warrior, Dragonkin, Great Lord, level 101 HP 220, 000, 000/220, 000, 000. The inferior dragons standing before their team numbered more than 1,000. And even the weakest Dragonkin fighter had an aura that was no weaker than that of the Great Lord-ranked Demonkin guards they faced before. As for the Great Lord-ranked Dragonkin warriors, their auras were just slightly weaker than that of the Purgatory Giant. Moreover, there were 3 of them. Defensive formations. Vastlock shouted. By the time Vastlock gave his command, however, the Dragonkin army was already charging at them. Although Shadowless Empire's members could barely hold their ground against the Lord-ranked Dragonkin fighters, they were at a severe disadvantage against the Dragonkin captains, inferior in terms of both basic attributes and reaction speed. When one of the Dark Knights failed to defend himself in time and got hit by the saber of a Dragonkin captain, he instantly lost over 1/4 of his HP. As for the Dragonkin warriors, Vastlock and Night Reader had to coordinate with each other just to pin down one. Stopping the remaining 2 Great Lords was beyond them. Retreat! Retreat to the cave! Vastlock shouted when he saw the 2 unfettered Dragonkin warriors slaughtering his teammates. Retreating was now their only option. Otherwise, a team wipe was inevitable. As Shadowless Empire's members continuously fell back, they eventually came across Zero Wing's members, who had also entered the Cold Spring Forest. You guys, hurry up and retreat. These Dragonkin are much stronger than the Lords and Great Lords in that cave. You'll die if you go up against them. Vastlock warned as he looked at Shurfong. However, as soon as the Dark Assassin gave this advice, one of the Dragonkin warriors slaughtering Shadowless Empire's members shifted its gaze toward Zero Wing's team, which was less than 100 yards away from it. Squinting its eyes, it immediately charged toward Zero Wing. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. They're doomed. Night Reader could not help but look at Zero Wing's members in pity at this sudden turn of events. The Dragonkin warriors possessed very high reaction speeds and intellect. These great lords posed an enormous threat even to Shadowless Empire's members, not to mention Zero Wing's members. However, just as the Dragonkin warrior arrived before Zero Wing's team and was swinging down its saber, a sword light suddenly struck at it. Suddenly, the Dragonkin warrior let out a wheeze as its 4-meter-tall body shot backward like a bullet and crashed heavily into a nearby tree, the massive tree shuddering at the impact. Chapter 23:19, Tier 3? As if time had stopped, silence fell over the entire Cold Spring forest. Whether it was the Dragonkin or Shadowless Empire's members, they were all in a daze as they looked at the Dragonkin warrior that had collapsed before the large tree. At this moment, not only was the Dragonkin warrior in a heavily injured state, but its silver armor even sported a large cut. If one looked closely, one could even see the white, broken bones of the Dragonkin warrior beyond this cut. If not for God's domain setting that made it so that creatures would die only if their HP fell to 0, the slash from before would undoubtedly have taken the Dragonkin warrior's life. Even so, the attack still took away a large chunk of the Dragonkin warrior's HP. What did he do? Night Reader could not help her shock as she stared at Shi Feng, the person who executed the attack on the Dragonkin warrior. Previously, when she used her trump card to attack the Dragonkin warrior, she had only managed to make it stumble back one step. Shi Feng, on the other hand, heavily injured the Dragonkin warrior with just one stroke of his sword. For a moment, she wondered if the main god system was playing a joke on her. After all, she was currently level 97. She was also equipped in 4 pieces of epic equipment and a top-tier epic weapon. In addition, she had a special legacy that increased her basic attributes and physique by a significant margin when fighting in darkness. Even the apex experts of super guilds were most likely no match for her when it came to basic attributes. Now, however, Shi Feng, who looked very ordinary and gave off no aura whatsoever, actually surpassed her strength by several degrees. No matter how she looked at this situation, she simply could not bring herself to accept it. He is probably Zero Wing's guild leader, Black Flame. According to rumors, he has already reached level 100. Vastlock guessed as he looked at Shi Feng, his evaluation of Zero Wing increasing by a grade. Even if he is level 100, there is no way he can have enough strength to send the Dragonkin warrior flying. We can't, even if we activated our berserk skills, Night Reader said. Although the Dragonkin warrior was only a great lord, its strength was just slightly inferior to the mythic-ranked purgatory giants. Even if they activated a berserk skill, they would, at most, just match the Dragonkin warrior. In order to send it flying over 20 yards, they would need strength at the standard of mythic monsters at the very least. Of course, it's impossible just by reaching level 100. However, I suspect that he has already completed his Tier 3 promotion quest, Vastlock said in a definite tone. Tier 3? How is that possible? Night Reader simply could not bring herself to believe Vastlock's speculation. Previously, she already considered the rumor of Shi Feng reaching level 100 a wild exaggeration. The Shadow World had much more abundant leveling resources compared to the main continent, yet even they, the top players of Shadowless Empire, had only managed to reach level 97. Now, however, Vastlock was telling her that Shi Feng had not only reached level 100 but also completed his Tier 3 promotion quest. This was unbelievable. The difficulty of promotion quests increased with each subsequent tier. The difficulty of the Tier 3 promotion quest was especially high. To complete the Tier 3 promotion quest, players would not only have to be of a sufficiently high level but also needed to invest a lot of time into making preparations. For Night Reader herself, even if she had made all the preparations she could, she still wouldn't be confident of completing her Tier 3 promotion quest. After all, experts of their caliber couldn't settle for a mediocre result in their Tier 3 promotion quest. Needless to say, someone like Shi Feng wouldn't settle for this either. While Night Reader and Vastlock were talking about Shi Feng, the heavily injured Dragonkin warrior suddenly stood up and let loose a deafening roar, which echoed throughout the forest. Moreover, the Dragonkin warrior did not stop at just one roar. Instead, it repeatedly roared again and again. Did it get hit too hard in the head? Night Reader found the Dragonkin warriors' incessant roaring strange. Moreover, the injured Dragonkin warrior wasn't the only one acting strangely. Every other Dragonkin in the army also started roaring. No! Vastlok's complexion darkened as realization struck him. They're calling for reinforcements. As soon as Vastlok finished speaking, a deafening roar came from the depths of the forest. Following which, a commotion broke out in the distant forest, and very quickly, a huge swarm of Dragonkin charged out of there. The newly arrived Dragonkin numbered more than 3,000, including as many as 5 Dragonkin warriors. Run! Vastlok shouted, his scalp turning numb at this sight. At Vastlok's order, Shadowless Empire's members immediately dropped what they were doing and fled for the cave they had come from, without hesitation. However, despite seeing Shadowless Empire's members retreating, Shifeng and the others still maintained their positions. Why aren't you guys running yet? Night Reader asked as she looked at Shifeng. We'll block them, so you guys should use this opportunity to retreat. It is still too soon for you all to come here, Shifeng said before walking toward the Dragonkin army, together with Zero Wings members. Since Vastlok had warned him before out of Gudv Karato, Shifeng naturally didn't mind helping Shadowless Empire now. You're crazy. Do whatever you want. Night Reader huffed when she saw Zero Wing advancing toward the Dragonkin army. She then turned her head away and left. Shifeng might have reached Tier 3, but he was only one person. He wouldn't be able to keep the several thousand Dragonkin at bay all by himself. Not to mention, 5 more Dragonkin warriors had joined the fight now. Even if the swordsman could suppress these great lords, could he suppress all 8 of them? However, before Night Reader had gone 100 yards away from her previous position, she saw Zero Wing's team clashing with the Dragonkin army. When the two sides came into contact, Shifeng initiated the battle by executing Void Slash, using the 6 slashes his skill generated to send 6 Dragonkin warriors flying back and crashing into the Dragonkin behind them. As for the 2 remaining Dragonkin warriors, Kola stopped one of them while Turtledove stopped the other. Kola's strength might not be comparable to the Dragonkin warriors, but with the fragmented legendary ranked Titan Guard and his Dragonslayer legacy, he neutralized all of the Dragonkin warriors' attacks without fail. As for Turtledove, although she was inferior to Kola in terms of both defense and strength, she had Yen Tianxing assisting her from the side. Yen Tianxing influenced the Dragonkin warriors' attacks, such that they all landed on Turtledove's shield and nowhere else. After seeing that all 8 Dragonkin warriors were stopped, Alluring Summer, Heathwaite, Zhao Yueru, and the other magical class players started bombarding the approaching Dragonkin captains and Dragonkin fighters. Like a mobile turret, Zhao Yueru sent even the High Lord-ranked Dragonkin captains flying with her spells. With just one AoE spell, she created a large clearing amid the Dragonkin army. Even the Dragonkin warriors stumbled when struck by her attacks. Despite the severe numerical disadvantage, Zero Wing's 100-man team coped with the Dragonkin army without suffering any casualties and relentlessly pressed deeper into the Cold Spring Forest, suppressing the Dragonkin army thoroughly. Dragonkin fighters and Dragonkin captains died quickly, one after another, under Zero Wing's bombardment. Crap, are they even human? An axe-carrying Dark Berserker, who had already arrived back at the cave, cursed aloud when he saw the Dragonkin army getting repulsed. He had had a tough time dealing with just one Dragonkin captain, yet Zero Wing's members were toying with the High Lords as if they were children. Zhao Yueru, Alluring Summer, and Heathwaite, in particular, had devastated the several dozen Dragonkin captains with their attacks, preventing the High Lords from reaching Zero Wing's rear line. Shifeng was even more frightening, single-handedly suppressing 6 Dragonkin warriors. Let alone damaging the swordsman, the 6 Dragonkin warriors couldn't even get within 5 yards of him. Their HPs also plummeted. After only a short moment, the 6 Dragonkin warriors had already lost 1/10 of their HPs. At this rate, the deaths of all 6 were just a matter of time. How is Zero Wing so strong? After Zero Wing's team disappeared into the snow-mantled forest, Night Reader was in a daze for a long time. When she remembered how they had thought to prove their superiority over Zero Wing by defeating the Purgatory Giant, she felt a little embarrassed. She had never imagined that things would turn out this way. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yu Shifeng's performance, in particular, had shocked her. Every one of his actions was beyond her perception. If he had decided to contest for the Purgatory Giant back then, the consequences would have been dire. Most likely, he could annihilate their entire 200-man team all by himself. Let's return now. Zero Wing is much stronger than we initially thought. The higher-ups will need to adjust our approach to Star Moon Kingdom, Vastlock said after giving the matter some thought. Shifeng's strength was simply too frightening. He was no longer an existence Tier 2 players could hope to contend with. Moreover, the other members of Zero Wing also possessed considerable strength. With the guild definitely much stronger than ordinary major powers, Shadowless Empire would have to tread carefully in Star Moon Kingdom from now on. After saying so, Vastlock turned around and had everyone prepare to leave the Cold Spring Forest. As for Night Reader, she turned involuntarily for one last look towards the direction Shifeng disappeared. So what if you're Tier 3? Just you wait. I'll catch up with you soon. At that time, I'll show you just how powerful I am. I'll make you regret looking down on me. When Night Reader thought of the words Shifeng said to her before, she gnashed her teeth in anger and frustration, feeling as if she had been treated like a fool. Immediately afterward, she turned around and left the Cold Spring Forest. Chapter 23-20 Level 100 Exploration Zero Wing's members gradually advanced deeper into the Cold Spring Forest. As the map had never been explored by players before, the number of Dragonkin Zero Wing's members encountered along their journey kept increasing. Fortunately, the number of Dragonkin warriors they came across did not, so the growing number of enemies did not affect the team negatively. It only provided the team with even more EXP. The EXP granted by level 100 monsters was far greater than that of level 99 monsters. Although Shifeng had brought Zero Wing's main force to grind at a level 100 Forbidden Land before, everyone's level had been very low. As they had to rely on Tier 3 demons to do most of the fighting back then, their grinding efficiency had been considerably low. Now that everyone in the team had the combat power to contend against level 100 lords, they made short work of the level 100 plus Dragonkin. As a result, everyone's experience bar increased at a very rapid rate. After grinding for just 6 hours, everyone in the team had already leveled up once. Now, even the lowest leveled player in Zero Wing's main force was level 98, whereas the guild's top experts like Yen Tianxing had reached level 99. As for Shifeng, he too had gained his final percent and reached level 101. However, in contrast to the team's leveling speed, the Dragonkin's loot rendered everyone speechless. Even the best piece of equipment dropped by the High Lord-ranked Dragonkin captains was level 100 Mysterious Iron rank. Moreover, this was from the first kill of these Dragonkin captains. Otherwise, the weapons and equipment they dropped would be only bronze rank. The quality of the Dragonkin captain's loot was far inferior to that of level 99 High Lords. Shifeng, however, did not find this situation surprising. After reaching level 100, ordinary experts would be able to gear themselves only in level 100 Mysterious Iron equipment. If they wished to get level 100 Secret Silver equipment through killing monsters, they needed the support of a sufficiently strong team. As for obtaining level 100 fine gold weapons and equipment from monster drops, that was absolutely impossible for them. Only Tier 3 experts would have the ability to grind for level 100 fine gold weapons and equipment. As for dark gold weapons and equipment, players would need both superb strength and luck. This was also the reason why, after frontline players reached level 100, the various powers of God's domain would start frantically investing in Tier 3 experts and master lifestyle players. Past level 100, quantity no longer mattered. Instead, what mattered the most was quality. One could say that Tier 3 experts and master lifestyle players were the true foundation of the various powers. Without Tier 3 experts and master lifestyle players, level 100 plus weapons and equipment at the fine gold rank or better would be inaccessible. Meanwhile, If a guild did not possess top-tier level 100 weapons and equipment, how was it supposed to develop? Level 100+ monsters weren't easy opponents, especially after players reached level 105. Before reaching level 105, players could still rely on dark gold weapons and equipment that were below level 100 to fight monsters and bosses that were below level 105. However, that would no longer be possible at level 105. Past level 100, monsters would receive a significant improvement in strength every 5 levels. Without top-tier weapons and equipment of a corresponding level, Tier 2 players would not be able to contend with monsters and bosses of the same level at all. Only Tier 3 players would be able to. However, players capable of getting promoted to Tier 3 as soon as they reached level 100 were extremely rare. Moreover, although Tier 2 players might have an easier time completing their Tier 3 promotion quest as their levels increased, they would still require the assistance of top-tier weapons and equipment to succeed. Guild leader, I found a parchment that can't be appraised. Blackie said excitedly after picking up a parchment dropped by a Dragonkin warrior. He then handed it to Shifeng, anticipation filling him. His appraisal had already reached the advanced standard and was only one step away from the master standard. An item that he could not appraise definitely wasn't ordinary. A parchment? After Shifeng used omniscient eyes to appraise the parchment, surprise and joy filled him. Not bad. This is a magic trap design. A trap design? Blackie, however, was disappointed when he heard Shifeng's words. How unlucky. I thought we got a design for a weapon or equipment. Traps were common in God's domain. Some players would even use traps to deal with field bosses. However, compared to magic arrays, traps were very much inferior. Some traps were even ineffective against monsters at Great Lord rank or above. However, Tier 2 players could easily deal with Lord-ranked monsters. Setting up traps to deal with a Lord would be a waste of time and materials. This is something very good, Shifeng said, chuckling. In any case, have everyone keep an eye out for it. If any more drop, bring them to me. Also, have Melancholic's side prepare the materials necessary for making this trap. Prepare as many as possible. Most likely, every player in God's domain had suffered at the hands of traps before. In fact, many experts had been killed by traps. However, as players couldn't properly utilize traps against monsters, traps never gained much popularity among players. However, traps were almost guaranteed when exploring ruins in God's domain, so how could they be useless? The reason for everyone's misconception about traps being useless was simply current players being limited to using and producing basic traps. The materials and production method for basic traps were common and simple, so it was only natural that they had very little effect against monsters. As for why players were capable of making only basic traps right now, it was because the main god system intended for players to slowly adapt to and learn about traps before reaching level 100. However, after reaching level 100, the main god system would remove all restrictions on players. Naturally, this included the limitation on traps, and players would be able to make intermediate traps. Not only would intermediate traps use much rarer materials, but their production difficulty would also increase significantly. In return, however, their effectiveness against monsters would improve substantially. Let alone dealing with level 100 lords, intermediate traps could deal serious damage even to level 100 great lords and place them in a heavily injured state for a short time. Moreover, traps were more suitable for the general public than precious magic arrays, as they were much less costly to produce. During Shifeng's previous life, many Tier 2 experts had relied on intermediate traps to hunt high-ranking bosses and grind monsters. If not for these traps, the majority of Tier 2 players wouldn't have been able to survive in level 100+ neutral maps at all. Meanwhile, the design the Dragonkin warrior dropped was for the Countercurrent Swamp, a magic trap that was effective against monsters below level 120. When triggered, it would not only immobilize monsters for a brief period but also reduce the reaction speed and basic attributes of the trapped monsters by 15%. Of course, the stronger a monster was, the less effective the trap would be against them. Even so, the Countercurrent Swamp was very useful against great lords below level 120. Past level 100, even Great Lord-ranked monsters were considered bosses. Ordinary Tier 3 experts would have to flee if they came across a Great Lord of the same level. Soloing the boss would be impossible. With a magic trap, however, even Tier 2 players could kill level 100 Great Lords, so long as they had a sufficiently large team. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Alright, I'll notify the others about it, Blackie said, nodding. Even so, he still wasn't particularly interested in the magic trap. After all, he didn't believe the countercurrent swamp's effects could compare to those of a magic array. Following which, Shi Feng had his team slaughter the Dragonkin armies that they came across. He did not rush to the Cold Spring Forest Central region. After one day of steady grinding, Shi Feng obtained another 4 trap designs. 2 were for the countercurrent swamp while the other 2 were for a physical trap called Burning Fire. Physical traps had many more weaknesses than magic traps. For example, they were quite useless against flying monsters. However, physical traps also had very obvious benefits. For example, they could be used to target a group of monsters. Moreover, they could cause very high amounts of damage continuously, so long as a monster remained trapped inside them. If magic traps and physical traps were properly paired up, even Tier 2 players could live a profitable life in level 100 plus neutral maps. They would be inferior to Tier 3 players only when it came to raiding dungeons. Meanwhile, after the team killed another level 102 Dragonkin warrior, a purple glow enveloped the bodies of many members as these people reached level 100. The invisible chains that previously bound these players also shattered. Chapter 23-21, Superior Mythic. The players that had reached level 100 were astonished. My attributes are so high, and I feel so much more coordinated than before. That's not all that's changed. My senses are so much sharper and more realistic. In this state, my combat power has increased by at least 30%. Amazing! There's such a huge gap between level 99 and 100. Once I complete my Tier 3 promotion, Tier 2 experts under level 100 won't stand a chance against me. Ordinary players might not sense the changes that occurred when they reached level 100 right away, but Yan Tianxing and his companions noticed the changes immediately. They were stunned when they did. None of them had realized how great the difference was between level 99 and 100 before now. After leveling up once, their combat power had reached a whole new standard, and this was considering that most of their weapons and equipment were still level 95. If they equipped level 100 weapons and equipment, their combat power would skyrocket. Naturally, there was a major difference between level 95 and level 100 equipment. The level 100 mysterious iron items they had obtained after slaying the Dragonkin made that obvious. A level 100 mysterious iron weapon's attack power could almost rival that of a level 95 dark gold weapon, and the basic attribute bonuses were even slightly higher. It was easy to imagine how much their attack power, defense, and basic attributes would rise if they fully geared themselves with level 100 fine gold weapons and equipment. Furthermore, they had yet to challenge their Tier 3 promotion quests. Now that a number of us have reached level 100, Guild Leader, we should start raiding level 100 team dungeons, Blackie eagerly suggested after experiencing the changes due to his new level. They hadn't even dared consider setting foot in a level 100 team dungeon previously. Dungeons monsters were far stronger than monsters in the fields, after all, and without Shifeng's help, they had barely held their ground against level 100 plus field monsters before reaching level 100. Trying to raid a level 100 team dungeon would have been suicide. However, they had grown considerably stronger after leveling up, especially the players with epic weapons and equipment. These players' combat power had risen by far more than a mere 30%. Now, they'd have no issues taking on a dozen or so Dragonkin warriors, even without Shifeng's help. They definitely qualified to challenge level 100 team dungeons. Not only could they test their newfound strength by successfully raiding such a dungeon, but they'd also acquire high-quality level 100 weapons and equipment. In addition, their achievement would help spread Zero Wing's fame across the eastern continent, maybe even throughout God's domain. The other level 100 players voiced their agreement with Blackie's suggestion. They were all eager to challenge a level 100 team dungeon. Don't get so excited just yet. The system's restrictions on your bodies have been lifted now that you've reached level 100, so your physical condition is slightly different. Fight the Dragonkin first and give yourselves a chance to adapt, Shifeng said, shaking his head. Smiling, he continued, if you're so eager to test your new limits, I know the perfect place for you to do that. Players' combat power would substantially increase upon reaching level 100. They could now use their 5 senses and reaction speed to its full potential, but exerting all of their strength wasn't an easy task. Even domain realm experts would need quite some time to adjust, not to mention refinement realm experts. Shifeng had only been able to adapt so quickly because he was most familiar with this body. Although there were some minor differences between his current form and the body he had used during his previous life, he had sensed and adapted to these minor changes easily as a domain realm expert, perfectly exhibiting his full potential. A perfect place to test our strength? Where is it, guild leader? Kola excitedly asked. Unlike the others, he carried the Titan Guard, a fragmented legendary shield. Once he reached level 100, the restrictions on his shield had also vanished. As a result, he sensed a massive boost to his combat power. Overall, he had likely improved more than anyone else on the team. A superior mythic boss's lair, Shifeng announced, gesturing to the Cold Spring Forest Central region. Every member of the team was stunned when they heard Shifeng's answer. God's domain's mythic monsters weren't equal in terms of strength. Among them, superior mythics stood at the apex of their kind, wielding even more power than mythic-ranked archaic species. Everyone here was an expert, and they all had an idea of how powerful mythic monsters would become after level 100. Trying to challenge a level 100 mythic monster before they reached tier 3 was tantamount to throwing themselves into the jaws of death, let alone challenging a level 100 superior mythic. Relax. I'm quite confident that we will be victorious, one Shifeng assured them, chuckling at his carrot now. Take some time to adapt to your new bodies. A tier 4 dragon was an incredibly powerful being, but he had his heavenly dragon's breath. The ring was capable of suppressing dragons to an intense degree. Including Anna and Kite's assistance, they definitely had a chance of defeating the monster. Hearing that Shifeng was confident of their victory, his teammates breathed a sigh of relief. They obediently followed their leader's orders and used the nearby dragonkin as training dummies. After around 4 hours of training, the team had a basic grasp of their unrestricted strength. Once his team was ready, Shifeng led them toward the Cold Spring Canyon. The Cold Spring Canyon was far more dangerous than the Cold Spring Forest's other areas, home to many level 103 and 104 dragonkin. Even level 105 Grand Lord ranked dragonkin commanders wandered the area. If Zero Wings members had come here before reaching level 100, they would have died the moment they aggroed a dragonkin commander. Fortunately, Kola could single-handedly tank one of these Grand Lords at level 100, preventing the dragonkin from targeting any of his comrades. Once he had a hold on the dragonkin commander's aggro, the rest of the team slowly shaved away the Grand Lord's HP, eventually killing it. When Blackie looted the dragonkin commander, he obtained the Dragontooth Pendant, a level 100 fine gold necklace. Its basic attributes were more than 2 ranks higher than a level 95 dark gold necklace, and it increased the power of the wearer's dragon bloodline. Kola ended up winning the bid for the necklace, and when he equipped it, not only did it increase his basic attributes, but it also improved the purity of his dragon blood, improving his physique. Shifeng and his team finally reached the heart of the Cold Spring Canyon after another 6 hours or so of combat. He then retrieved the transfer stone he had received from the Adventurers Association and began to chant the incantation. The transfer stone transformed into violent energy that pierced an invisible barrier before Zero Wings' main force. As the barrier shattered, it revealed a paradise. Zero Wings members could hear birds chirping and smell fragrant flowers, and as they entered the space, they felt a pleasant sensation encompass their bodies. The fatigue from their long hours of grinding faded quickly as their stamina and concentration began to recover. This space was nothing like the outside world. However, before any of them had the chance to inspect this area, a horrific aura washed over them, so intense that it nearly knocked them on their backs. A dragon? Turning toward the aura's origin, their gaze rested on a 30-meter-tall infant dragon. Protected by its snow-carrot scales, the infant dragon was sound asleep. Every breath it took was powerful enough to shake the entire area. Ice Dragon, Heathwaite. Dragon, Mythic, Level 101 HP 1,840,000, 000/1, 840, 000. When the team saw Heathwaite's statistics, they had no doubt that if this infant dragon wished it, it could likely shatter this entire space, plunging it into the void. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU dragons had always been the symbol of destruction in God's domain. The various NPC cities' libraries contained a vast amount of information on these beings, always depicting dragons as natural disasters that could bring about the downfall of an entire country. If there hadn't been so few dragons in existence, they would likely have become God's domain's absolute overlords. Are we really going to raid a dragon, guild leader? Kola asked, gulping as he watched the slumbering ice dragon. For a moment, Kola wondered if Shifeng were playing some kind of joke on them. Even if he were Tier 3, Heathwaite could likely kill him in one hit, much less now. That's right. That's what we're going to raid. Shifeng nodded after taking a deep breath. He then pulled 2 Summon Guard scrolls from his bag and summoned Anna and Kite. Chapter 23-22, Draconic Spell. Heathwaite was a Tier 4 dragon, and normally, Shifeng would have tried to stay as far away from it as possible. Heathwaite might merely be an infant dragon, but it still stood at the peak among Tier 4 beings. It was no exaggeration to say that this dragon was invincible among Tier 4 beings of the same level. Even 1,000 Tier 3 players would meet their doom if they encountered a Tier 4 infant dragon of the same level, let alone Tier 2 players. The gap between their life ratings was simply too vast. Normally, only Tier 4 heroes, who had passed a trial of God and received a god's blessing, would have the strength to contend with an infant dragon. However, Heathwaite was under a life curse, which significantly reduced the effects of its life rating. If that weren't the case, it wouldn't have only had 84 billion HP and only be categorized as a monarch-ranked boss. Even a random dragon had the strength of a world boss, and a top-ranked world boss at that. Normally, defeating a true dragon without a Tier 6 god-ranked player would be impossible. Otherwise, the players that had successfully defeated a dragon of the same tier wouldn't have been regarded as legends and inspiration for countless players in God's domain. As the 2 summoning arrays gathered the necessary mana, the level 106 summoner, Anna, and the level 105 swordsman, Kite, emerged. During the short break Shifeng had taken after completing his Tier 3 promotion quest, Anna and Kite had completed another epic quest. As a result, their weapons and equipment had changed. Previously, they had both worn epic equipment that could grow with them to level 100, but now, they both had epic set equipment that would grow until they reached level 150. They had also both reached or surpassed level 105, and their basic attributes had undergone a considerable transformation. Despite the fact that Shifeng had reached Tier 3 and wore the disintegration armor, his attributes were no match for Anna's and Kite's. Once he had summoned his personal guards, Shifeng retrieved the Bible of Darkness and called forth a demon. Shifeng's Bible of Darkness was the real deal, so its power was unmatched. Moreover, as its user rose to a new tier, the Bible of Darkness would exhibit even greater strength. After a moment, a 20-meter-tall demon gate appeared before Shifeng. As the demon gate slowly opened, a Tier 4 Great Demon, enveloped in blue flame, stepped through. Blaze Demon, Dark Creature, Great Demon, Level 116 HP 420, 000, 000/420, 000, 0000. Wing's main force members gasped when they saw the Blaze Demon. They then turned to stare at Shifeng with incredulous looks. "You're too vicious, guild leader. You can actually summon a great demon to do your bidding." The various superpowers would likely go crazy if they knew about this. Blackie said as he glanced at the Bible of Darkness in Shifeng's hands. Blackie had seen the Bible of Darkness before, so he knew just how powerful it was. Its ability to summon Tier 3 demons was particularly useful to Tier 2 players. A Tier 3 demon would even be useful after players reached Tier 3. Such demons had many skills and spells and were far more powerful than ordinary Tier 3 summon creatures. However, Blackie hadn't dreamed that the Bible of Darkness could summon a Tier 4 great demon once Shifeng had reached Tier 3. This power was ridiculous. Tier 4 summoning scrolls were even rarer than epic weapons and equipment, and the various superpowers treated such items like priceless treasures, avoiding using them unless absolutely necessary. And yet, Shifeng could summon a Tier 4 great demon with the Bible of Darkness at no cost. Although a great demon had far less HP than ordinary mythic monsters of the same level, its combat power would be far greater than ordinary mythic monsters. Alright, everyone, get ready. The Blaze Demon will tank the Ice Dragon later during the raid. You guys only need to support and attack from the sidelines, Shifeng announced, chuckling as he returned the Bible of Darkness to his bag. The Spirit Emperor, Fantasy Extinguisher, had caused a sensation throughout God's domain during Shifeng's previous life due to the Bible of Darkness. With it, he had developed Fantasy Shrine from a first-rate guild into a superpower that could even suppress the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion in the Black Dragon Empire. Since Shifeng now had the real Bible of Darkness, he had even greater power. The Bible of Darkness was the very reason that Shifeng even dared to consider challenging the Cold Spring Forest's monarchs. He wouldn't have harbored the thought if he only had Anna and Kite to rely on. After all, a mythic-ranked monarch was even stronger than a Tier 4 hero. With Shifeng's command, Zero Wing's main force members went to work. Once his teammates were in position, Shifeng sent the Blaze Demon to charge at the Ice Dragon. Within seconds, the Blaze Demon was within 500 yards of Heathwaite. As the Blaze Demon approached, the Ice Dragon's eyes opened abruptly, and it woke from its slumber, turning its amber gaze on the intruder. Needing neither chance nor gestures, Heathwaite spread its jaws. With Heathwaite as the center, the Ice Dragon sucked a 300-yard radius dry of mana before a towering, white beam shot toward the Blaze Demon. Tier 4 Dragon Breath. Compared to the Dragon Breath Shifeng's Black Dragon Doppelganger had used, a true dragon's Dragon Breath was on an entirely different level. The Blaze Demon transformed into an ice sculpture before flying back over 500 yards. At the same time, the area around Heathwaite became a world of ice, the attack utterly transforming the terrain. Aside from Shifeng, every member of Zero Wing's team was dumbfounded. They had all heard legends and details about dragons, but they hadn't actually seen one in action. At this moment, they finally understood what a dragon truly was. If they hadn't stood over 1,000 yards away, that Dragon Breath attack would have killed every one of them. Fortunately, the Blaze Demon had initiated the raid. Even so, the Blaze Demon had lost over 20 million HP after taking a direct hit from Heathwaite's Dragon Breath. All of you, snap out of it. Once you get close to the boss, make sure that you're spread out. Healers, throw everything you have at the Blaze Demon. Shifeng barked. He couldn't help his sigh of relief as he watched the Blaze Demon break free from its icy prison, appearing mostly intact. If that Dragon Breath had heavily injured the Blaze Demon, this raid would be over. Neither Anna nor Kite could tank the Ice Dragon, and their combat power couldn't even compare to the level 116 Blaze Demons. They'd either die instantly or be heavily injured if they took a direct hit from a Tier 4 Dragon Breath. The Blaze Demon ran at Heathwaite again. Fortunately, Dragon Breath had a relatively long cooldown, and because of that, the Ice Dragon switched to using its claws to attack the incoming demon. The Blaze Demon proved to be no match for Heathwaite. Each time it blocked an attack, it lost over 8 million HP. Although the Blaze Demon launched a counterattack from time to time, its Tier 4 spells only dealt a few million damage. The two creatures' strengths were on completely different levels. Shifeng only activated Miniature World and Ring of Brilliance to suppress the Ice Dragon and enhance his allies' combat power once the Blaze Demon had secured Heathwaite's aggro. Unfortunately, Miniature World was barely effective against the Infant Dragon. However, Heavenly Dragon's Breath's dragon domination was fully effective, reducing the dragon's basic attributes by 20%. Once Heathwaite's basic attributes had been suppressed, Zero Wings healers were barely able to keep up with the damage the ice dragon dealt to the Blaze Demon. Shifeng also used Life Domain to restore the Blaze Demon's HP to full, on occasion. For a time, the ice dragon was helpless against the summoned demon, during which Heathwaite's HP continued to decrease under Zero Wings bombardment. 95%, 90%, 85%. However, Heathwaite was not an easy opponent, and it turned its dragon breath on a random target from time to time. The players who had failed to dodge the attack had become ice sculptures, losing all of their HP in the blink of an eye. Dragon Breath had even slain Turtledove, despite her active life-saving skill. As Heathwaite's HP continued to fall, the intervals between each Dragon Breath grew shorter. By the time Heathwaite's HP reached 30%, only a little over half of the team remained standing. Despicable ants! I'll burn you to ash! Heathwaite bellowed before chanting an incantation. A threefold magic array with a 500-yard radius then appeared above the ice dragon, plundering all of the mana within a 1,000-yard radius. Tier 4 Draconic Spell, Meteorite Fall. Suddenly, a colossal meteorite, which blocked out the sun, descended from the magic array, growing larger as it emerged. When Zero Wings survivors saw this, they began to despair. A Tier 4 Draconic Spell. Even Shifeng's expression darkened at the unexpected sight. How is this possible? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Draconic spells were some of the most primitive spells in God's domain, beginning at Tier 4. Even dragons rarely possessed Draconic spells of the same tier. Meanwhile, a Draconic spell was even more powerful than a large-scale destruction spell, capable of rivaling the god's divine arts. A single blow from such a spell could annihilate tens of thousands of creatures. Not even invulnerability spells could stop their devastation. Anna, summon the Valkyrie! Shifeng shouted. Not even he had a countermeasure for a Tier 4 Draconic spell. Anna's Valkyrie was his only hope. Anna immediately began to chant her angel summoning incantation. Chapter 23:23 Valkyrie vs. Dragon. Anna finished the angel summoning incantation in 2 seconds, and the moment she did, a gigantic magic array appeared above her, no smaller than Heathwaite's meteorite fall. A Valkyrie with 3 sets of pure white wings then emerged, landing before Anna. A Tier 4 higher Valkyrie? When he saw the upgraded version, Shifeng was stunned. Angel summoning was Anna's legacy skill, and Shifeng had always treated it as his final trump card since the skill allowed Anna to summon a Valkyrie that was 2 tiers higher than her. When Anna had been a Tier 2 personal guard, she had been able to summon a Tier 4 Valkyrie. Now that Anna had reached Tier 3, she should logically be able to summon a Tier 5 Valkyrie. With such a powerful ally, Zero Wings' remaining team should have no problem suppressing a Tier 4 infant dragon. However, Anna's Valkyrie was still only Tier 4. The only difference between the previous Valkyrie and this one was the extra set of wings. Angels' wings represented their status. An angel with 3 sets of wings was considered a higher Ankh, with 4 sets were considered archangels. In terms of life rating, archangels rivaled dragons, while higher angels were slightly weaker. But before Shifeng had any time to ponder the matter, the meteorite above them had nearly completed. Block it! Shifeng couldn't care less about the Valkyrie's status at the moment. He immediately commanded Anna to send her Valkyrie to stop Heathwaite's meteorite fall. The higher Valkyrie began to chant an incantation as soon as Shifeng gave the command. The higher Valkyrie's incantation was unique. Rather than draw mana from her environment, it drew on a primitive form of mana from the void. In less than a second, a dazzling, golden spear of thunder manifested in the Valkyrie's hands. An origin spell. Shifeng was ecstatic to see the spear of thunder form from the void's mana in the Valkyrie's hands. Origin spells were the most primitive form of magic in God's domain. They were the root of all spells, capable of rivaling divine arts. However, humanity had lost track of origin spells due to repeated wars between the gods. Shifeng had never expected the higher Valkyrie to use such magic. Before Shifeng could get over his excitement, the giant meteorite, so large that it covered the sky and so heavy that it shattered space around it, began to descend. It looked as if Armageddon had begun for a moment, and Zero Wings members fell further into despair. As the meteorite began to fall, the higher Valkyrie finished her incantation. She then threw her spear at the meteorite. Soundlessly, the thunder spear transformed into a streak of golden light as it struck the incoming meteorite. Boom! The moment the two attacks met, the impact caused a powerful explosion. The resulting shockwave was so powerful that it nearly lifted the players below off their feet. The gigantic meteorite disintegrated into countless, smaller meteors that rained down, creating craters as they struck the ground. Every meteorite was nearly as powerful as a Tier 4 large-scale destruction spell. Zero Wings members gaped as they watched the stones slam into the ground. Tier 2 and 3 players were little more than ants in a battle of this scale. If this battle had taken place in a city, rather than in this special space, the spell's residual effects alone would be more than enough to level half the city. After blocking Heathwaite's meteorite fall, the higher Valkyrie shifted her attention to the ice dragon itself. She formed another spear of golden electricity in her hands before vanishing. By the time Zero Wings players realized where she had gone, the Valkyrie had appeared before Heathwaite. Tier 4 Superior Instantaneous Movement. Not only did Superior Instantaneous Movement have more range than the normal spell, but there was also almost no delay between the caster's disappearance and reappearance. Moreover, the spell didn't affect the ambient mana, making it impossible for enemies to determine the caster's destination. When she appeared before Heathwaite, the higher Valkyrie thrust her spear at the ice dragon. The attack was so fast that not even Shifeng would have enough time to react. If that attack struck him, he'd die instantly. However, Heathwaite was a dragon and reacted instantly, countering the golden spear with a rage-filled claw strike. Boom! The impact of the collision created a deafening boom that echoed throughout the area. Surprisingly, the Valkyrie's strength was too much for Heathwaite, and the infant dragon stumbled 2 steps backward. After suffering this humiliating blow, Heathwaite turned a wrathful glare on Shifeng. Heavenly Dragon's breath suppression on dragons was simply too powerful, and the passive ability had plundered 20% of Heathwaite's basic attributes. Heathwaite already suffered a life curse, so its strength was slightly lower to the higher Valkyries. Now Dragon's domination affected it as well. It was no match for the summoned angel. Could everyone attack with everything you've got? Shifeng quickly shouted when he realized that Heathwaite was thoroughly suppressed. He had originally planned to use angel summoning only after Heathwaite had gone berserk, but he had been forced to use it early due to meteorite fall. Although Anna had risen to Tier 3, which strengthened her angel summoning, its duration had only increased from 10 seconds to 15 seconds. Unfortunately, Heathwaite still had nearly 30% of its HP remaining, and 15 seconds wouldn't be enough to kill it. Attack! Yan Tianxing shouted. Yan Tianxing realized the predicament they were in as well. He immediately activated his berserk skill and his trump card, Shadow Stink, a Tier 2 taboo skill. In a frenzy, Yan Tianxing transformed into 3 streams of fog, attacking the ice dragon and dealing over -70,000 damage with each hit. Occasionally, the fog streams landed a critical hit, dealing over -150,000 damage. The rest of Zero Wings survivors activated their trump cards as well, with the weaker players dealing around -50,000 damage, while the stronger members of the team, such as Zhao Yueru, dealing upwards of -200,000 damage. Zhao Yueru's critical hits even dealt over -500,000 damage to the ice dragon. Her Tier 3 fire-type spells were a massive advantage in this raid. However, Shifeng's DPS was undoubtedly the highest. After activating Heavenly Dragon's power, his strength could even surpass an ordinary mythic monster's, and as a result, he dealt over -1 million damage even without fire-type skills or spells. When he used Void Slash, he instantly devoured over 10 million of Heathwaite's HP. With the higher Valkyrie, Anna, Kite, and the Blaze Demon attacking as well, Heathwaite's HP rapidly decreased. 25%, 20%, 15%. The higher Valkyrie continued to suppress Heathwaite after the dragon had gone berserk. However, she didn't deal quite as much damage. When Heathwaite's HP dropped below 10%, the higher Valkyrie's duration ended, and she vanished. "Humans, you're dead!" Heathwaite bellowed as the higher Valkyrie disappeared. The ice dragon swiped its tail at the Blaze Demon and Anna's Holy Knight, sending both of them flying. It then swiped a claw at Anna, ignoring the Blaze Demon completely. The ice dragon intended to rid itself of the most troublesome opponents before dealing with the remaining pests. Even without her army of summon creatures, Anna's DPS was exceptionally high. With her summon creatures, she was the infant dragon's most challenging opponent. Although Anna's spells could overwhelm ordinary mythic monsters, they were utterly useless against the berserk Heathwaite. "Don't think you can take out our main DPS so easily." Suddenly, Shifeng appeared before Anna and activated his disintegration power, swinging Killing Ray at Heathwaite's incoming claw. The moment Shifeng activated disintegration power, it cancelled out Heavenly Dragon's power. In return, however, the ability temporarily elevated Shifeng to Tier 4. Not only did he now wield Tier 4 strength, but his physique, reaction speed, and skills had risen as well. Boom! When the attacks collided, Shifeng stumbled 3 steps backward due to the impact, losing more than 50,000 HP. He was still at a disadvantage, but he had successfully blocked Heathwaite's berserk attack. When that attack had failed, Heathwaite responded with another claw strike. This time, however, the ice dragon activated a skill in the process. Tier 4 skill, Sky Splitter. 5 razor-sharp claws flew toward Anna from different directions, each with more power than the previous claw strike. As soon as Shifeng steadied himself, he executed Lightning Flash to counter the attacks. Executing the secret technique proved far easier after his forceful upgrade to Tier 4, and he sent 17 sword lights at the approaching claws. A series of explosions blew apart the ground around Shifeng, but even after all 5 attacks, he had only stumbled back 3 steps. He also only lost around 200,000 HP. Even at Tier 3, Shifeng had over 1,700,000 HP, far less than he currently had. Losing 200,000 HP was nothing life-threatening. After watching Shifeng pin down the ice dragon, his teammates breathed a sigh of relief and continued their frenzied assault against Heathwaite. Time passed quickly. As the battle progressed, Heathwaite's attacks grew stronger, but with the Blaze Dragon and the Holy Knight's help, Shifeng kept the ice dragon in check, preventing it from harming Anna or Kite. However, the team suffered the occasional casualty when Heathwaite fired its dragon breath. 5%. 4%. 3%. When disintegration power's duration ended, Shifeng followed it up by activating Power of Darkness and Blade Awakening, relying on his twofold berserk's effects to tank Heathwaite's attacks. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. When less than 5 seconds of Shifeng's twofold berserk remained, Heathwaite's HP had fallen below 7 million. Meanwhile, fewer than 30 players were still standing, and the surviving healers could no longer keep up with the ice dragon's damage output. Die! Shifeng activated Divine Providence and swung Killing Ray for a final blow. Lightning Slash. A massive lightning bolt sliced through Heathwaite's neck, leaving a deep gash across its throat. That lightning bolt also destroyed the last of the infant dragon's HP. Chapter 23-24, Ice Dragon's Loot. Everyone's experience bars exploded with EXP as Heathwaite's colossal body crashed to the ground. A level 100+ mythic boss would already provide a lot of EXP, and as a monarch-ranked boss, Heathwaite would award even more. In the end, the 24 or so survivors watched as their experience bars rose beyond 90%. Although they had only reached level 100 less than a day ago, they were almost at level 101. Shifeng was now at 63% of level 101 as well. The EXP from the Ice Dragon alone was worth nearly 3 days of normal grinding. It's finally dead. And I thought we were finished, Blackie said, sighing deeply as he plopped down on the ground. He was ecstatic that they had finally won. Near the end of the raid, Heathwaite's defense and attack speed had steadily increased. At one point, Shifeng hadn't even been able to pin down the Ice Dragon with the Blaze Demon and Holy Knight's help. Moreover, Heathwaite's battle recovery generated over 10 million HP every 5 seconds, and as a result, they had barely moved the Infant Dragon's HP bar toward the raid's end. Yen Tianxing and the others felt like survivors of some great disaster. None of them wanted to imagine how the raid would have gone without Shifeng's Bible of Darkness and 2 personal guards. When Heathwaite had died, it had dropped over 100 items beside its corpse, forming a small mountain that radiated waves of intense pressure. It's so powerful. This is the first time I've ever seen items that emitted such intense pressure. I wonder what kind of items dropped? Maybe there's a legendary item. Everyone stared at the mountain of loot with glowing eyes, and when they heard mention of a legendary item, the eager light in their gazes grew even brighter. They all forgot about their exhaustion for a moment, wanting to charge forth and inspect the dropped items. The strongest known item at this stage of the game was Fragmented Legendary Rank, which everyone assumed Shifeng possessed. However, Zero Wing's main force members knew the truth. There was more than one fragmented legendary item. Naturally, this was a guild secret. Exposing this truth would only invite God's domain's various powers to target Zero Wing, and only an expert of Shifeng's caliber could openly own a fragmented legendary item without having to fear for his life. If anyone else were in his position, they wouldn't even dare to set foot outside of an NPC city. Epic items couldn't even compare to the benefits a fragmented legendary item provided, much less a true legendary item. Based on what players had learned from the game's libraries, every legendary item in the game had the strength to decimate heaven and earth. With such an item, players would have the power to transcend tiers. Before their fight with Heathwaite, these players wouldn't have been so concerned about such a power, convinced that they could bridge the gap between tiers with high enough basic attributes, but now, they understood what that kind of strength truly meant. Without the strength to transcend tiers, Tier 3 players had no hope of contending with superior mythic bosses. Alright, let's resurrect our fallen. Shifeng simply chuckled when he saw the hunger in everyone's eyes. He found their assumptions hilarious. Obtaining a legendary item with so little effort was impossible, and after level 100, weapons and equipment drop rates decreased considerably. On average, even mythic bosses' loot would consist of fine gold weapons and equipment. One would have to be incredibly lucky to acquire dark gold weapons or equipment from a mythic boss. However, Shifeng had to admit that he was surprised by how much Heathwaite had dropped. This was the first time he had felt such an incredible pressure from a boss's loot as well. Having received their orders, the surviving team members pushed aside their curiosity for the moment and began to resurrect their teammates. Fortunately, a monarch boss's lair was similar to the space within dungeons. Even if players died here, they'd only lose 10% of their EXP, and only 5% if a healer revived them. Thus, the level 100 players that had fallen hadn't dropped back to level 99. While his companions revived, Shifeng organized the infant dragon's loot. Amazing! Is this a benefit for the first kill? Shifeng was stunned as he examined the items. His only aim in killing Heathwaite was to complete his crusade quest and become Cold Spring Canyon's lord. He hadn't expected to gain much from the raid itself, yet he was elated that he had chosen this monarch boss to raid. The Ice Dragon had dropped a total of 121 items, which was normal for a monarch. However, the items' quality far exceeded Shifeng's expectations. There were as many as 24 inferior legendary materials among the loot, all necessary for producing epic and fragmented legendary items. Even without a design for such items, these materials could increase one's production success rates when crafting level 100 dark gold items. Level 100 plus dark gold items were incredibly rare in God's domain, only slightly more common than epic items under level 100. they'd still be rare even after Master Lifestyle players gain the ability to craft level 100+ dark gold items. The required materials for producing such items were incredibly precious. They only dropped from powerful bosses, and each boss dropped very few at a time. Moreover, the production success rate for level 100+ dark gold items was very low. Advanced Master Lifestyle players would only have a theoretical success rate of 35%. Every player that focused on their subclass knew that theoretical success rates were nowhere near the actual success rates. It was merely the highest possible success rate players could achieve. In practice, a minor deviation in the process could reduce the success rate to 20% or 30%. If one included an inferior legendary material in the process, however, their production success rate with level 100+ dark gold items would increase by at least 5%. With these 24 materials, Zero Wing could produce a dozen or so level 100+ dark gold items. Surprising Shifeng further, Heathwaite had also dropped legendary materials. The Ice Dragon's Claw. Countless Grandmaster Forgers dreamed of obtaining this item. Dragons were one of the rarest types of monsters in God's domain, and they were immensely formidable. Acquiring a dragon's claw was nearly impossible. When used to forge weapons, dragon's claws were godly materials. As long as the player made some minor modifications to the claw, they could easily produce an epic weapon, even without an appropriate design. If they had an epic weapon design, they could craft a fragmented legendary weapon by using a dragon claw as the base material. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Any dragon claw that had appeared on the market during Shifeng's previous life had easily fetched the price of 2 fragmented legendary items in an auction. After all, one could sacrifice 2 random fragmented legendary items to secure a weapon of the same rank that was more compatible with its wielder. And Heathwaite had actually dropped 2 ice dragon's claws. Why wouldn't Shifeng be excited? It was no wonder why the ice dragon's loot had radiated such an incredible pressure. Aside from materials, Heathwaite had dropped 5 dragon's blood vials that could boost Cola and Alluring Summer's dragon bloodlines, further strengthening their Dragon Slayer classes. While Shifeng appraised the several designs the infant dragon had dropped, one result left him utterly dumbfounded. How is this possible? A flying ship design. Chapter 23-25, Crimson Dragon Flying Ship. Shifeng fell silent for a long time as he stared at the tattered design in his hands. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't believe that Heathwaite had dropped a flying ship design. Flying mounts were incredibly rare in God's domain, and even with a common flying mount, one would have endless bragging rights. Even the weakest flying mount was rarer and more precious than a level 100+ epic weapon. Flying ships, on the other hand, were even more amazing. The most ordinary flying ship's movement speed could rival an extraordinary flying mount, and one could accommodate up to 100 people at a time. Their aerial combat abilities were even at the peak of Tier 3. However, the main continent's various countries had monopolized the technology for flying ships, and players typically had no way to get their hands on one. At best, players could rent an airship, which could only transport goods and people, from one of the kingdoms or empires. One would be dreaming if they thought to rent a flying ship, an aerial weapon of mass destruction. Shifeng had never even heard of anyone obtaining a flying ship design by killing a boss. If players wanted to acquire a flying ship design, they'd have to raid a major NPC power's main headquarters or steal one from one of the NPC kingdoms or empires. Of course, both methods were exceedingly dangerous. There was a safer method: players could create one themselves. The subclass requirements for creating a flying ship, however, were immensely demanding, and players would have to invest a lot of effort and time into the research. As for the cost of creating one from scratch, even superpowers would have a hard time justifying such a massive expense. Most superpowers would rather purchase a completed flying ship. Purchasing a flying ship was much easier than purchasing a flying ship design. A guild could do so through the black market or by earning a sufficiently high status in an NPC country. Regardless of which method a player or power relied on, the price would be exorbitant. Furthermore, players could only purchase a very limited number of flying ships. As far as Shi Feng knew, the easiest way to buy a flying ship was to become a duke in a kingdom. As a duke, a player could purchase one flying ship for 80,000 gold. To acquire more, they'd have to try their luck in the black market. Unfortunately, the black market only accepted ancient gold, not regular gold. And yet, Shi Feng had just obtained a flying ship design after killing Heathwaite. If the various powers of his previous life had known this, they would have slaughtered every ice dragon in God's domain. Unable to contain his excitement any longer, Shi Feng clicked on the design to inspect its statistics. He wanted to know what rank this flying ship design was. Crimson Dragon Flying Ship Design can be used to construct a common flying ship with a maximum capacity of 100 people and peak Tier 3 combat power. The Crimson Dragon flying ship carries 8 magic cannons and 1 magic crystal cannon. Piloting the flying ship requires a minimum of 6 people. Producing the flying ship requires 1,000 Titan Silver, 10,000 Void Iron, 2,000 Mana Stones, and 100 Magic Elven Stones. Sure enough, it is the most common type. Shi Feng inwardly sighed when he saw the statistics. If he had obtained a bronze flying ship design, he could have ruled over the entire Cold Spring Forest without any issues. Bronze flying ships had Tier 4 combat power after all, and would be a massive threat to Tier 3 players. Not even Shi Feng would escape from a bronze flying ship's all-out assault with his life. A flying ship wasn't a monster. It did not have the mobility flying monsters possessed, and it didn't have monsters' vast repertoire of skills and spells. The so-called Tier 4 combat power didn't mean that the flying ship's overall combat power was limited to Tier 4. Rather, each of the flying ship's attacks had peak Tier 4 power. With over a dozen cannons, a flying ship's bombardment could even blow a Tier 4 Apex expert to smithereens. Without a Tier 4 legendary flying mount or something even more powerful, they'd have to flee the moment they spotted a bronze flying ship. After giving the matter some thought, Shi Feng realized that he was being too greedy. Superpowers struggled just to obtain a single common flying ship, let alone a bronze flying ship. 1,000 Titan Silver and 100 Magic Elven Stones. The production cost is vicious. The Crimson Dragon flying ship's necessary materials astonished Shi Feng. Titan Silver was a rare byproduct that could be obtained from mining fine Titan Oregon. Thus far, Zero Wing had only compiled a little over 2,000 Titan Silver ingots. Magic Elven Stone was even rarer and more valuable. One could only obtain the super rare or from grade 2 or veins. It was just slightly more common than 7 Luminaries crystals. Including the other materials, producing the Crimson Dragon flying ship would cost roughly 50,000 gold, several times more than the bronze-ranked Guardian Puppet's production cost. However, it was still cheaper than trying to become a duke. Moreover, he would get more value for his money. A common flying ship would be far more useful to players than bronze combat puppets. Even though a common flying ship's combat power was only at the peak of Tier 3, it could transport 100 players, allowing them to travel across the continent freely. Moreover, players could rest and recover while on a flying ship, which they couldn't do while riding a flying mount. The recovery ability wasn't very powerful, but it was a precious asset when exploring level 100+ neutral maps. Moreover, players would be able to flee when they encountered mythic-ranked flying monsters thanks to the flying ship's defensive capabilities. Did the boss drop something good, guild leader? Blackie asked, curious about the joyful expression on Shi Feng's face. Here, take a look for yourselves, Shi Feng said, chuckling. Aside from the flying ship design, he shared the loot's information in the team chat. Crap. Legendary materials. And that's a design for a level 100 secret silver equipment. This fine gold ranked polar ice set is amazing. When they saw the boss's loot, every member of the team was excited. Heathwaite might not have dropped an epic item, but these players weren't fools. They knew how precious inferior legendary and legendary materials were. These were all top-tier materials that could be used to produce epic items. Moreover, the Ice Dragon had dropped 7 pieces of level 100 dark gold equipment and over 30 level 100 fine gold weapons and equipment pieces. These weapons and equipment would grant many of the team members a massive boost to their combat power. The polar ice set Heathwaite had dropped was particularly eye-catching. It might only be a 6-piece, level 100 fine gold set equipment, but its attributes were nearly 3 ranks stronger than that of level 95 dark gold equipment. With this set, a level 100 elementalist could easily defeat lower-level experts in full epic equipment. Following which, Shi Feng held an internal auction, and Yi Luofei claimed the polar ice set. Now, only Shi Feng, Kola, and Zhao Yueru, who had at least one fragmented legendary item and multiple pieces of epic equipment, had higher basic attributes than she did. Once the weapons and equipment had been distributed, Shi Feng returned to White River City with his team. Since Zero Wing's main force members had finally reached level 100 or higher, they qualified to challenge their Tier 3 promotion quests. Naturally, he couldn't continue to help them level up in the Cold Spring Forest, and more than a dozen of the team members were ready to challenge their promotion quests now. Wasting time would be a pity. Players would only become true powerhouses in God's domain once they reach Tier 3, after all. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Shi Feng spent some time advising his players on how to complete their Tier 3 promotion quests before he dismissed them. Those that weren't strong enough yet left to prepare a bit more, and the players that were strong enough headed to the Adventurers Association immediately. Meanwhile, Shi Feng headed toward White River City's Adventurers Association for another matter. Within one of the Adventurers Association's second-floor VIP reception rooms. Lord Bronze Legatee, how may I be of service? The female elven administrator asked as she entered the room. I wish to turn in my crusade quest for Cold Spring Forest's Ice Dragon, Heathwaite, Shi Feng announced as he retrieved a colossal, silvery white dragon horn and placed it on the table between them. This dragon horn was proof that he had slain Heathwaite. As soon as Shi Feng proved that he had completed his crusade quest, the sounds of a series of system notifications reached his ears. Chapter 23-26, 1-Star Lord System. You have completed the Crusade quest for the Ice Dragon, Heathwaite. Rewarding Lord's Token, level +1, Star Moon Kingdom Reputation +300, Guild Popularity +10,000 System. Congratulations! You are the first player to become a Lord in God's domain. Rewarding Lord Popularity +100. System. Congratulations! For acquiring 100 Lord Popularity points, you have been promoted to a 1-Star Lord. The system notification repeated 3 times while Shi Feng rose to level 102. The system promoted me to a 1-Star Lord just for being the first player to become one? Shi Feng couldn't believe his eyes as he stared at the system notifications. The concept of a Lord was still likely foreign to most players, not to mention Lord Popularity. When players became a Lord in God's domain, they'd gain the ability to recruit NPCs to form their own Knight Division. However, the process was similar to searching for personal guards, so it had its challenges. Furthermore, a Knight Division had 5,000 slots. It was easy to imagine how difficult it would be to fill these slots with high-quality NPCs. The only method to ease the process was to increase one's Lord popularity. The higher a Lord's popularity was in God's domain, the easier it would be to persuade and recruit NPCs with high growth potential. Unfortunately, increasing one's Lord popularity was incredibly difficult, only possible by completing special quests. Moreover, one would only gain a handful of popularity points with each quest. Accumulating 100 Lord popularity normally required a lot of time and effort. Meanwhile, every 100-point increment was a turning point. The first 100 points would elevate one to a 1-Star Lord, at which point players wouldn't have to run around NPC cities in search of appropriate NPCs. They could simply start a draft through the Adventurers Association. These drafted NPCs might not be uniformly powerful, but there would be quite a few with high growth potential. If one were lucky enough, they might even recruit a secret Silver Guard. Of course, with more Lord popularity, the standard of their drafted NPCs would increase. The problem of increasing his Lord popularity to 100 points had troubled Shi Feng. Without a solution, he'd have to spend several months finding capable NPCs to fill his 5,000 knight slots. Fortunately, God's Domain solved that problem for him. Administrator Lorraine, I wish to draft members for my knight division through the association, Shifeng declared as he showed the Lord's token to the elven administrator. Very well. However, the fee will depend on the scale of the draft you wish to implement. Generally, a draft in a town costs 10 gold per week, 100 gold per week in a city, 300 gold per week in a kingdom's capital, and 1,000 gold per week in an imperial capital. Where would you like to implement your draft? Lorraine asked. How expensive? It's no wonder why the Adventurers Association is the fourth wealthiest power in God's Domain. Shifeng was speechless after hearing the prices. Second and third-rate guilds had no hope of obtaining a lord's position in the past. The various superpowers and top-ranked first-rate guilds had monopolized this benefit. Hence, Shifeng hadn't actually known how much it would cost to implement a draft. He certainly hadn't expected it to cost this much to form a knight division. The results of a draft depended on one's luck. NPCs would not simply respond to a draft because the Adventurers Association had issued it. According to Shifeng's calculations, he would need to implement a draft in several hundred cities to recruit 5,000 knights with relatively high growth potential in a short time. I'd like to implement the draft in these country cities, Shifeng decided. After giving the matter some thought, he felt it would be best to recruit from cities in flourishing kingdoms and empires. In the end, he paid 44,500 gold to implement his draft in more than 400 cities. It was a large enough expenditure to put a first-rate guild's finances in the red. God's Domain's guilds were pushing their experts to reach level 100 right now, and as a result, it was only natural that their expenses would rise. Fortunately, Zero Wing had the Candlelight trading firm and multiple guild towns and cities to generate income. The guild earned just as much profit as an ordinary superpower. However, Zero Wing still needed to support its main headquarters in the real world and the Heaven's Rumble training center. The guild wasn't particularly wealthy at the moment. It seems I'll have to find ways to increase the guild's profits. With how much Zero Wing has right now, financing 5,000 knights is impossible. After paying for the drafting fee, Shifeng mentally calculated how much he'd need to spend on his future knight division. A 5,000-man knight division would definitely be an amazing asset, but it would be expensive to maintain. Unlike the NPC soldiers one could recruit to defend guild towns and cities, knights weren't affiliated with a kingdom or empire. Rather, they were considered a lord's personal combat power. Hence, players would not receive subsidies from a kingdom or empire, relying on their own funds to pay their knight salaries. Affording a knight division wasn't easy, and to make matters worse, each knight's salary would depend on the NPC's growth potential. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. To hire and nurture a bronze-ranked, Tier 2 knight, one would have to spend 50 gold per week. Multiplied by 5,000, a division of bronze, Tier 2 knights would cost 250,000 gold per week. Moreover, this cost didn't include the price of weapons and equipment for these knights. For a moment, Shifeng couldn't help but admire the first-rate guilds that had ruled their own territories in the past. Once he had taken care of the draft order, Shifeng left the Adventurers Association and made his way to the Candlelight trading firm. He intended to start the Crimson Dragon flying ships production immediately. After reaching level 100, the various powers would prioritize their aerial development. Whoever controlled the sky would become an overlord in God's Domain. Level 100+ maps were very far from civilization, after all, and the ability to travel through the sky would give players a huge advantage when grinding for resources. Moreover, this advantage would become more prominent as time passed. If he wanted to bolster Zero Wing's development, he had to arm the guild with flying ships. Chapter 23-27, Producing a Flying Ship. White River City, Candlelight Trading Firm. The special room, which was the size of a basketball court, contained various piles of rare materials. Any ordinary player would likely go into a frenzy trying to claim them all if they saw this room. These materials were easily worth more than 15,000 gold altogether, and even though the value of coins had significantly depreciated by this stage of the game, that was still an astronomical amount of money to ordinary players. Converted into credits, it would be enough for the average citizen to live out the rest of their lives without worry about food or shelter. Here are the last of the materials you requested, Guild Leader, Melancholic Smile said as she handed 100 magic elven stones to Shi Feng. Shi Feng had basically asked for everything the Candlelight firm had in stock of the rare materials he needed, particularly the Titan Silver and Magic Elven Stone. These were rare drops, even from the Flame Demon's valleys attributed or vain. No other guild could likely fulfill Shi Feng's demand for 100 magic elven stones. Good. Shi Feng nodded approvingly after inspecting the materials in the room. He then continued in a serious tone, I'll need you to help me with something later, but you must keep it an absolute secret. I can't tell anyone? Melancholic Smile was a little confused. The Candlelight trading firm rigorously screened any potential members before they were recruited. Moreover, all core members were required to sign a series of strict contracts, ensuring the smallest chance possible that the firm's technology and methods leaked. Sharing such technology required one to transfer designs. Without the correct design, it didn't matter if a player knew how to produce an item. Now, however, Shi Feng forbade her from even mentioning their discussion. It was a bit unusual. You'll understand soon, Shi Feng said. He then carefully pulled the Crimson Dragon flying ship design from his bag and placed it on the stone table before him. Melancholic Smile didn't think much of the design initially. She had seen plenty of precious and rare designs and recipes in her line of work. She had grown numb to such surprises. However, when she realized what this design booklet depicted, she froze in shock. Flying ship. Melancholic Smile could not believe her eyes. As a lifestyle player and the Candlelight trading firm's manager, she could only dream of crafting an airship, which was only a method of transportation, let alone a flying ship. Countless lifestyle players dreamed of creating flying ships, especially after seeing airships fly from one city to another. However, they assumed that would remain a dream. Players had absolutely no access to designs for airships and flying ships due to the various kingdoms and empires' heavy restrictions regarding their flying technology. Creating one would require an immense amount of knowledge and skill, not to mention a ton of materials for the necessary experiments. And yet, Shi Feng had just dropped a flying ship design on the table between them. It was at this moment that Melancholic Smile, more or less, realized why Shi Feng had forbidden her from speaking of this to anyone. Although the trading firm had restrictions in place that prevented members from sharing trade secrets, those restrictions were only effective in the game. Candlelight couldn't stop these players from running their mouths off in the real world, and if news that Zero Wing had obtained a flying ship design went public, the consequences would be unimaginable. The various powers already hungered for their own airships. On the other hand, flying ships were capable of transportation and aerial combat. Needless to say, the various powers' desire for flying ships was even greater, nearly maddening. If the various powers learned that Zero Wing had a flying ship design, they'd do anything they could to take it, and if they couldn't, they'd ensure that Zero Wing didn't keep it. Acquiring a flying ship wasn't easy, but with the design, one could create as many flying ships as they wanted. After a certain point, flying ships would be significantly more useful than combat puppets in battle. Players had ways to deal with combat puppets, after all, but none of them knew how to deal with a flying ship. Hence, the various powers would do whatever necessary to ensure that Zero Wing failed to develop, and they'd strike while they still had an opportunity. That's right, it's a flying ship. I intend to produce one, but I can't handle the task alone. Aside from forgers, I'll need a large number of engineers and alchemists, Shi Feng said. To protect this secret, however, I'll need you to split these players into multiple groups and assign them various parts to work on. I'll handle the final assembly. We're going to make one now? The very idea began to make Melancholic Smile nervous. Guild leader, just the core engine is so complex that I'm not even sure an advanced master forger can handle it. If we fail, all of this magic elven stone will be useless. Why don't we wait a little while longer? If it were only an issue of money, Zero Wing could handle it, but these magic elven stones were incredibly rare. Collecting more wasn't simply an issue of money. If they failed in producing the flying ship's engine, they would have to wait for a very long time before they'd have enough elven magic stone to attempt it again. I wish it could wait too, but Zero Wing can't afford that, Shifeng explained, flashing her a bitter smile. The various major powers were desperately leveling up, and many of them have already begun to explore level 100 neutral maps. The Shadowless Empire's members had made that clear. Once they secured a foothold in level 100 neutral maps, the various superpowers would finally be able to exhibit their true strength. Zero Wing didn't have support from any major corporations. Thus, it couldn't afford to continuously recruit large numbers of experts, especially refinement realm and above experts, rapidly expanding. Zero Wing would have to nurture such experts on its own. There was simply no comparison between the various superpowers and their guild. Obtaining more resources and ensuring it had time to develop was the only way Zero Wing could secure its position in God's domain. That was the only way the guild would survive the intense struggle between the various superpowers in level 100+ neutral maps. Now that Zero Wing had its own territory and had begun to draft NPCs for a knight division, the guild needed more funds and resources to arm its knights. Maintaining a proper knight division with Zero Wing's current income was impossible. Unfortunately, it had become considerably more difficult to earn profits and resources from other worlds now that the planar passages had opened. That left Zero Wing with only one method to increase its income: transportation of goods. The industry would be particularly profitable when it came to moving non-bag space items. Shifeng had intended to produce intermediate traps to earn more funding, but it was too soon to introduce these items to the public. Most of the various large guilds' main forces hadn't begun exploring level 100 neutral maps yet, and demand for intermediate traps would be limited. Furthermore, Zero Wing's members would need these traps as well. Without at least 100 intermediate trap designs, it would be very difficult for Candlelight to produce enough intermediate traps for Zero Wing's purposes and to earn substantial profits. However, transportation methods were a different story, especially when it came to flying ships. Even a common flying ship could carry up to 500 non-bag space items, far more than any sailboat. In addition, flying ships' movement speed was much higher than sailboats. If Zero Wing resold non-bag space materials, it would make a killing. This was why the various superpowers had gone crazy for airships and flying ships during Shifeng's previous life. I understand. I'll copy the design for these parts and split them between multiple groups. I'll ensure that no one has any idea that we're making a flying ship, Melancholic Smile promised, nodding. She then began to examine the flying ship's design and plan accordingly. It shouldn't be very difficult to hide what they were doing. Some of the flying ship's parts were similar to those in ordinary ship designs. Most of the parts that were different would require forgers. As long as Shifeng crafted those parts himself, they shouldn't have any issues keeping this a secret. Melancholic Smile then left to distribute the construction materials and designs among the Candlelight's master lifestyle players. None of these players suspected a thing when they received their orders. This wasn't a usual process, after all, especially after Zero Wing had recently begun to craft bronze speedboats. Meanwhile, Shifeng turned his full attention to forging the flying ship's engine. After producing the Guardian puppets and Hell tanks, he was quite familiar with engine production. The Crimson Dragon flying ship's engine was simply a more complex version. Sure enough, this is beyond an ordinary advanced master forger. As Shifeng examined the engine's design, he could feel a headache begin to brew. Fortunately, his forging standard wasn't a problem. With the Philosopher's Hand, he could elevate himself into an advanced master forger, so he met the engine's minimum requirements. However, the magic array that he needed to inscribe on the engine would be a challenge. It was so complex that it nearly required a master magician to complete. However, Shifeng did not panic. Instead, he calmly and slowly researched the engine's magic array and repeatedly attempted to draw it. After over a dozen hours of practice, Shi Feng had finally learned how to draw the magic array successfully and barely finish it in one go. Good. Let's make the engine now. Shi Feng took a short break before he focused on producing the engine. The engine's production process wasn't simple, and Shi Feng had decided to use a dragon blood crystal, a top-tier inferior legendary material Heathwaite had dropped, to increase his success rate. Crystallized dragon power, the dragon blood crystal was the size of a fist and contained energy that was nearly as pure as that in 7 luminaries crystals. Not only could one use a dragon blood crystal as a power core for a city's defensive magic array, but it could also reinforce magic arrays. It was easily as valuable a level 100+ epic weapon. Unfortunately, Heathwaite had only dropped 1 dragon blood crystal. Shi Feng had considered saving it to strengthen one of his city's magic arrays, but after giving the matter some thought, he decided to use it to increase his production success rate. A flying ship would be an immeasurable asset, after all. Time passed quickly, and the engine slowly took shape. Although others would have struggled to temper the materials, it was quite easy for Shi Feng with the help of the Soul Flame. It saved Shi Feng plenty of time and concentration. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Shi Feng finally finished the engine's body after 6 hours of restless work. As the engine took shape, the special forging room's mana surged toward it. Sensing the change, Shi Feng began to engrave the magic array immediately. Whether or not the production process was a success would largely depend on the engraved magic array at the end. Not only did the array have to be completed within a short time, but it also had to be completed in one move. Shi Feng couldn't afford to pause during the process. This was the only way the engine's mana would be able to flow smoothly. A single, minor deviation would waste all of his efforts thus far. 1 minute. 3 minutes. 5 minutes. As the mana flowing into the engine began to thin, Shi Feng engraved the array faster. His concentrated rapidly depleted as if he were executing lightning flash with every second that passed. Just as the mana flow was about to cut off, Shi Feng finished the last connection, completing the magic array. Chapter 23-28 Advanced Flying Ship. Did it succeed? As a storm of mana enveloped the engine, Shi Feng began to grow nervous. The engine was the most difficult part of the flying ship to produce, but once it was complete, the remaining parts would be fairly easy to craft. The most troublesome aspect of the remaining parts was how much manpower they required to produce. Fortunately, with Candlelight's strength, the trading firm had the manpower to simultaneously construct the parts of 3 flying ships, let alone 1. The magic array engraved in the engine began to glow as the mana calmed down, actively gathering the mana into the engine. The engine consumed so much mana that the density in the room increased. Wonderful! It's a success! As Shi Feng watched, his expression shifted to one of elation. This wasn't the first time he'd forged an engine, and if it had failed, he knew the stream of mana flowing into it would have been unstable. Now that this was done, he was practically guaranteed to produce a Crimson Dragon flying ship. Moreover, he hadn't expected the mana density in the room to rise to such an extent. The flying ship's engine drew in at least 3 times more than the bronze combat puppet's engine. An engine was the very heart of a machine and played a major role in determining the machine's strength. Following which, Shi Feng tapped on the engine to appraise it. System: Bronze Flying Ship Engine has been forged successfully. Forging proficiency increased by 1,000 points. Obtained 40 million EXP. The dragon blood crystal's effects are so powerful? Shi Feng stared at the results with wide, bloodshot eyes. He had already been relieved that the production process had been a success, but he hadn't expected the dragon blood crystal to upgrade the engine's rank from common to bronze. Normally, bronze engines only powered bronze flying ships. An engine like this would definitely increase a common flying ship's rank. After all, common and bronze-ranked flying ships required roughly the same quality of materials. Their engines were the main factor that made a difference. Shi Feng immediately notified Melancholic Smile to hasten the remaining parts construction. After more than 20 hours, Candlelight's master lifestyle players finally produced all of the Crimson Dragon flying ship's various parts. However, Shifeng didn't start the assembly process when Melancholic had delivered them. Rather, he used the Seven Luminaries Ring's spatial gate to transport Melancholic's Smile and himself to an open field within the White River City region. A flying ship was massive, much larger than a sailboat. The special forging room just didn't have enough space. Hence, Shifeng needed an open location for the final assembly. Of course, to protect this guild secret, he decided to construct the flying ship in an empty, open plain. There was an extremely large number of parts to a flying ship. Normally, if a player tried to assemble one themselves, they'd need at least 2 days to complete the task. However, Shifeng and Melancholic Smile had already become intermediate master forgers, saving a lot of time with their skills. With Shifeng's Soul Flame, in particular, he could assemble and weld parts together quite quickly. After the two players worked for a dozen or so hours, they had finally completed the Crimson Dragon flying ship. They marveled at the 60-meter-long, 20-meter-tall mechanical ship with a crimson hull before them. So, this is a flying ship? Despite taking part in the assembly process, Melancholic Smile couldn't believe her eyes. Even from far away, the Crimson Dragon flying ship was a shocking sight to behold. Next to its colossal frame, even an extraordinary flying mount looked like an infant. Shifeng sighed ruefully as he gazed at the vessel. Crimson Dragon flying ship, advanced flying ship, maximum capacity, 130 people durability 5000/5000 possesses Tier 3 upper rank defensive capabilities. Item storage when liberated, 20,000 bag space slots and 800 non-bag space slots. Additional active skill 1 Magic Shield. Absorbs up to 50 million damage for 10 minutes. Cooldown, 15 minutes. Additional active skill 2 Mana Pulse Cannon. 4,000-yard range. Deals Tier 4 damage to a radius of 50 yards. Cooldown, 45 seconds. 8 cannons are currently equipped. Up to 12 cannons can be equipped. Additional active skill 2, Magic Elven Cannon. 5,000-yard range. Deals Tier 4 peak rank divine damage to a radius of 200 yards. Cooldown, 5 minutes. Additional active skill 4, Mana Field. Disrupts the flow of mana within a 2,000-yard radius, weakening all incoming magic damage from Tier 3 spells or below by 30% for 5 minutes. Cooldown, 20 minutes. Each activation costs 300 magic crystals. The bronze engine Shifeng had crafted elevated the Crimson Dragon flying ship to advanced rank. Now, this flying ship was even faster than extraordinary flying mounts, and its cannons and defenses had increased by a rank as well. This Crimson Dragon flying ship could even contend with level 100+ mythic monsters. If his guild had had an advanced flying ship like this in the past, his and Shadow's development would have been massively different. Even if Shadow hadn't been able to contend with a superpower, it would have had enough strength to instill fear in first-rate guilds. Tier 4 experts would have dared mess with the guild. If Dragonheart Island's superpowers find out that we have this Crimson Dragon flying ship, they'll die from envy, Melancholic Smile said, astonished as she inspected the flying ship's statistics. She had forged hell tanks, so she understood how powerful this Crimson Dragon flying ship was. Aside from its cannon's frightening power, its Tier 3 upper rank hull was enough to render any attack below Tier 4 powerless. Without a mythic combatant, the various superpowers would have no hope of damaging the flying ship. Even if they launched Tier 4 attacks, it would take ages for them to get past the flying ship's 5,000 durability. Envious? I'm more afraid that they'll go mad when they see it, Shifeng said, chuckling. Melancholic Smile was a lifestyle player, not a combat power. She didn't truly understand what it meant to have a flying ship that could stand against mythic monsters. Players would be able to reach most places in God's domain with a flying ship like this. They wouldn't have to worry about the limitations flying mounts faced or attacks from powerful flying monsters. This vessel would give players a tremendous advantage when grinding for levels or transporting non-bag space items, which were becoming more valuable nowadays. Non-bag space items were becoming useful for more than just producing war weapons, buildings, and ships. Now, such items could even be used to craft players' weapons and equipment, especially level 100 plus secret silver and above weapons and equipment. This was also why these weapons and equipment pieces were so valuable. It's a pity that the flying ship's production requires so many materials. Even if we focused everything on collecting materials, it would still take a week or so before we'd have enough for a second flying ship. We'd have to get really lucky to collect enough for a third, Melancholic Smile surmised, sounding disappointed. If they could produce a fleet of flying ships now, no one would be able to get in Zero Wing's way in God's domain. Unfortunately, the Crimson Dragon flying ship required too many rare and precious materials, some of which were non-bag space items and particularly tedious to transport. If the Candlelight trading firm's main headquarters hadn't had such a large stockpile of these materials, they wouldn't have been able to construct the first flying ship so quickly. Just keep collecting the materials. Every flying ship we make right now counts, Shifeng said. As soon as Shifeng finished giving Melancholic Smile her next duties, he received a message notification. The sender was none other than Sind Heart, Immortal Light's guild leader. When he read the message, Shifeng frowned. Guild leader, has something happened? Melancholic Smile asked, noticing that Shifeng's mood had soured after receiving that message. Immortal Light has been working with the Freedom Alliance in Sea's End, and it seems that there's been some trouble that's preventing Immortal Light from transporting materials out of the area, Shifeng said. The Freedom Alliance has invited its allied guilds to send representatives for a meeting, and Sindheart is hoping that we'll send one to investigate the situation. Immortal Light was the naval guild that Zero Wing secretly controlled in the Apocalypse Empire. It had been relying on Immortal Light to secure its naval resources, especially those from Sea's End. The area was home to many materials that were imperative to producing ships and level 90+ dark gold weapons and equipment. If Immortal Light couldn't secure resources from Sea's End, Zero Wing would suffer, which was why Sindheart had requested a representative from Zero Wing to resolve the matter. I think it's best if I go myself. These materials are important for Candlelight's merchandise. If we lose access to these materials, Candlelight's income will plummet, Melancholic Smile suggested. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You don't worry about it. I'll go. Right now, you need to focus on collecting the materials we need to construct the Crimson Dragon flying ships, Shifeng said, shaking his head. The Crimson Dragon flying ship was crucial to Zero Wing's survival. Without it, the guild wouldn't be able to exert dominance in the Cold Spring Canyon. Relying on a 5,000-man night division wouldn't be enough. Not only was a flying ship faster than flying mounts, but it also had the combat power to squash Tier 3 experts like ants. Meanwhile, Shifeng wasn't as skilled as Melancholic Smile when it came to collecting materials. After all, she had long since grown familiar with the Candlelight trading firm and its connections. I'll do that, then, Melancholic Smile answered, nodding. As Zero Wing's guild leader, Shifeng would naturally be a stronger representative. Moreover, she didn't have the energy to manage the material collection while addressing the issues in Sea's End. Melancholic then used a return scroll to teleport back to White River City, while Shifeng stored the Crimson Dragon flying ship in his epic spatial bag and made his way toward the Apocalypse Empire. Chapter 23-29. Times have changed. Apocalypse Empire, Blue Bay City. After teleporting to Apocalypse City, Shifeng continued toward Blue Bay City, one of the Empire's port cities. Although Blue Bay City wasn't a particularly large NPC city, its player traffic was intense. Shifeng saw an endless stream of players entering and leaving the city's teleportation hall. Moreover, many of these players wore exquisite clothing and the 2-star merchant's insignia. Some even had the 3-star insignia. The merchant's insignia was proof of a merchant player's ability. The higher a merchant player's star rank was, the greater their ability. Normally, 3-star merchant players were supported by a large guild, and they possessed significant resources and sales connections. Hence, they were known as great merchants and were even rare in imperial capitals. And yet, Shifeng encountered quite a few great merchants in Blue Bay City. Based on the bland reactions to these merchant players, their presence in the city didn't seem to be unusual. So many great merchants gathered in Blue Bay City because it was a trading port. Countless players came into port each day with resources from the various neutral powers out at sea, which allowed the merchant players in the area to earn huge profits. This city's development speed is amazing. I doubt it'll be long before Blue Bay City is promoted to a large-scale city and gains a Tier 4 NPC magistrate manager. As he watched the various horse and transport carriages rolling down the streets, Shifeng had to admit that Sind Heart had impressed him. When Sind Heart had wanted to move Immortal Light to a new city, Shifeng had suggested that he develop near the sea. The various first-rate guilds hadn't been paying much attention to the ocean at that time, after all. By relying on the few resources Zero Wing had provided, Sind Heart had established Immortal Light in one of the Apocalypse Empire's port towns, eventually expanding the guild to occupy all of Blue Bay City. Now, Blue Bay City was almost ready for its promotion into a large-scale NPC city, and Immortal Light's naval prowess had grown powerful enough that the guild didn't need to fear first-rate guilds. Sind Heart's management was even more impressive than Gentle Snow or Aqua Roses. Not only would Blue Bay City grow larger once it became a large-scale NPC city, but the conveniences it offered would also improve. The city would have no trouble accommodating a large number of players, and Immortal Light would even qualify to contend with the Apocalypse Empire's first-rate guilds. As Shifeng left the teleportation hall, he headed toward a nearby advanced restaurant. A level 96 man approached him as he arrived. The Elementalist wore 5 pieces of epic equipment, and the weakest piece on him was level 95 Dark Gold rank. 2 more level 96 players followed the Elementalist, one of which was a cleric, while the other was a berserker. Both wore 3 pieces of epic equipment. Seeing these 3 greet Shifeng, the rest of the players in the restaurant were surprised. Who is that guy? Immortal Light's guild leader and 2 of its great experts are actually welcoming him. Could he be some big shot? Every player in Blue Bay City knew of Immortal Light's guild leader, Sind Heart, as well as the 2 great experts that accompanied him. To secure control of the city, Immortal Light had challenged and defeated many of the large guilds that had occupied Blue Bay City. It had even sunk a first-rate guild's fleet, which had spread its fame across the Apocalypse Empire. Moreover, Sind Heart was even one of the top 10 elementalists in the Empire. Even first-rate guild leaders treated him with respect. Yet now, Sind Heart had been waiting to greet an ordinary-looking player. Why wouldn't this surprise them? Hearing the hushed discussions around him, Sind Heart had Immortal Light's members clear out the restaurant. The spectators obediently stopped talking and scattered. I hadn't expected you to make the trip here, Brother Yifeng. With you, we'll stand a much better chance in Sea's End, Sind Heart said as he greeted Shifeng. Brother Sind Heart, you jest. May I know what happened with the Freedom Alliance? Why is it calling in its allies for a meeting? Shifeng asked, getting straight to the point. I've just received some information regarding the situation. Let's head inside to continue our conversation, Sind Heart insisted, his expression becoming disheartened at the mention of the Freedom Alliance. He led Shifeng into the advanced restaurant he had fully reserved earlier. As Shifeng and Sind Heart entered the restaurant, the cleric and berserker gave each other disgruntled looks behind Shifeng's back. This guy doesn't think much of our guild, does he? He started demanding answers as soon as the boss walked up to him. Our boss is too mild-tempered. If I were in his position, I would have given this guy a piece of my mind. I don't want him thinking that Immortal Light is the same small guild it had been in the past. Forget it. He'll see how powerful Immortal Light has become once we get to Sea's End. The 2 experts weren't pleased with Shifeng's behavior. Immortal Light might have received a lot of resources from Zero Wing and shared half of its shares with the guild, but Immortal Light had changed. Now, it was only slightly weaker than the Empire's first-rate guilds, and on the water, it was even stronger than some of them. Not only was Sind Heart Immortal Light's guild leader, but he was also an extraordinary expert who had successfully repelled the Peak Experts King's return had sent. Even superpowers were wary of his strength at sea, yet Shifeng treated the man so casually. Once they had taken their seats in the restaurant, Sind Heart filled Shi Feng in on the details regarding the Freedom Alliance's recent actions. A new power had joined the Freedom Alliance, and now the Alliance had 12 major fleets, not 11. This new power was exceptionally powerful. It had started out as the last-ranked 12th fleet, but it had soon taken the top position in the Freedom Alliance. This had significantly changed the status quo in the Freedom Alliance. The Alliance had only controlled 3 of the major cities in Sea's End, but now it controlled 5. Naturally, this had caused a qualitative improvement regarding its resource income. Normally, this development would be a good thing, but the newly minted First Fleet wanted to reorganize the Freedom Alliance's partnerships with the various powers, including disqualifying some of them. Hence, the Alliance had invited the various powers to visit Starfall Island for this meeting. Starfall Island was a particularly dangerous location in Sea's End. Ordinary ships wouldn't make it into the sea zone, torn apart by the area's powerful sea monsters. One could only get through with a sufficiently strong fleet. A new power has joined the Freedom Alliance? Realization dawned upon Shi Feng when he heard Sind Heart's explanation. A commotion had occurred in the Freedom Alliance during Shi Feng's previous life, but Silent Entropy, the original First Fleet's commander, had eventually suppressed it. Unfortunately, Silent Entropy and his fleet had suffered a massive setback thanks to Shi Feng, which must have prevented him from controlling the situation. This resulted in a new power taking over the Freedom Alliance. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Since the Freedom Alliance has grown stronger, they want to see whether their partners still qualify to participate in their alliance. While I can understand its reasoning, I had never thought something like this would happen so suddenly, Sind Heart said, smiling bitterly. I've recalled all of Immortal Light's best ships, but it'll probably be another 3 or 4 hours before they return. If we wait until then to leave, we'll likely be a little late to the Freedom Alliance's meeting. They would need a small fleet of bronze speedboats just to get to Starfall Island. Without sufficient strength, they'd only find death waiting for them. How many bronze speedboats and stronger have you gathered so far, Brother Heart? Shi Feng asked. We currently have 8 bronze speedboats and 1 mysterious iron speedboat ready to depart, Sind Heart said, shaking his head. It won't be enough to make it to Starfall Island. We'll need at least 20 bronze speedboats and a sailboat. 8 bronze speedboats and 1 mysterious iron speedboat? That'll be enough. We should set out right away, Shi Feng declared. Chapter 23:30 Mysterious Iron Sailboat. They're enough. Sind Heart gave Shi Feng a confused look. Normally, a small fleet of 8 bronze speedboats and a mysterious iron speedboat would be a formidable force, but they needed to reach Starfall Island. Starfall Island served as a transit point for players who wanted to explore level 100+ sea zones. Every sea monster near the island was level 95 or higher, and their population density was terrifying. One could even encounter mythic-ranked king-class sea monsters in the area. Without a sufficiently powerful fleet, their journey to Starfall Island would be a one-way trip. I've brought a sailboat with me. With it, we should have enough combat power, Shi Feng tried to reassure Sind Heart when he saw the man's worried expression. He then took out the crystalline bottle housing the storm sailboat from his bag. A mysterious iron sailboat? Sind Heart's eyes nearly fell out of their sockets when he saw the storm sailboat. Sind Heart had long since known that Zero Wing possessed superb naval power. The guild had both the secret silver-ranked Swift Dragon speedboat and bronzed-ranked One-Horn sailboat, after all. Even now, there were only 2 known secret silver speedboats throughout the Apocalypse Empire, Pantheons and Zero Wings. Although a secret silver speedboat was only 1 rank higher than a mysterious iron speedboat, the difference between the 2 boats' combat power was like the difference between heaven and earth. Not even an ordinary sailboat was a match for a secret silver speedboat. When Phoenix Rain had secured her position on Thunder Island, Zero Wing's Swift Dragon speedboat had been a large part of the reason for her success. Moreover, the Freedom Alliance's passing monarch had relied on the Swift Dragon and One-Horn speedboats to secure the best territories the Freedom Alliance occupied. Although passing monarch hadn't been able to claim his as the Alliance's first fleet, he had secured the second rank enough authority that his word in the Freedom Alliance was only second to Silent Entropy's, the original First Fleet's commander. Passing monarch had also become the reason that Immortal Light had been able to continue developing in the Apocalypse Empire. Sind Heart had never dreamed that Zero Wing would have an even stronger ship. Reaching Starfall Island shouldn't be much of a problem with this storm sailboat, but it's getting pretty late. We should head out, Shifeng said as he stored the repaired storm sailboat. This is wonderful. We'll have a much better chance of securing our position now. Sind Heart exclaimed, brimming with confidence. Setting aside Zero Wing's strength as a pseudo-superpower and the relationship between Passing Monarch and Shifeng, the storm sailboat would be more than enough to ensure Immortal Light retains its position as one of the Freedom Alliance's partners. In fact, it might even help improve relations between Immortal Light and the Freedom Alliance. Sind Heart gathered his men immediately, and they teleported to Sea's End's Blue Jade City with Shifeng. Once they arrived, they'd set sail towards Starfall Island Sea Zone. Sea's End, Starfall Island. As a transit hub for players traveling to level 100+ sea zones, the island wasn't very populated right now. However, due to the Freedom Alliance's invitation, any power that wanted to remain a member of the Alliance had no choice but to brave the dangerous journey to the island. As a result, a large number of speedboats and sailboats filled Starfall Island's port. The weakest speedboat at the dock was bronze rank, and quite a few of them were mysterious iron rank. Even naval superpowers would be stunned by the grand sight. I wonder what stunt the Freedom Alliance is trying to pull this time? They called us all the way out here. It's likely that they're trying to determine whether or not we're strong enough to get this far. Ordinary powers have no hope of reaching this sea zone. We lost a considerable amount of durability just from the fights with the sea monsters on the way here. That's right. I came with a fleet of 20 bronze speedboats and 1 sailboat. If my fleet had been any weaker, I wouldn't have made it here. As the various powers' representatives discussed their journey to Starfall Island, they couldn't help but frown. They all had questions regarding the Freedom Alliance's invitation to such a dangerous place, and none of them knew what the Alliance intended. They could not figure out what the Freedom Alliance was trying to do. It should be known that the Freedom Alliance was a giant in Sea's End, and any power it allied itself with was formidable at sea. Otherwise, they couldn't guarantee the cargo's safety as they transported it across the sea, earning a stable income of resources and coins. I wonder how the Freedom Alliance intends to choose which partnerships it will maintain? The Alliance is nearly as powerful as the House of Seas and controls 5 of Sea's End's major cities. Even naval superpowers in other locations are afraid of the Freedom Alliance at this point. I assume they'll base their decisions on each power's strength and connections. Take Immortal Light, for example. As a second-rate guild, it doesn't qualify to partner with the Freedom Alliance, but because of its close relationship with Passing Monarch, the Third Fleet's commander, it can collect resources that not even first-rate guilds like ours can reach. Indeed, Immortal Light should be responsible for as much as 10% of the Freedom Alliance's resources. Even naval superpowers are envious. However, based on my information, Zero Wing stands behind Immortal Light. The guild is a large part of the reason that Passing Monarch had risen to his current position. It is only natural that Immortal Light has been assigned better resources than other powers. As the various representatives chatted about Immortal Light, envy flashed in their eyes. There were over 30 powers cooperating with the Freedom Alliance, yet Immortal Light claimed 10% of the Freedom Alliance's resources. Immortal Light's luck will run out soon. I'm sure the Freedom Alliance intends to redistribute its resources during this meeting, and not even Silent Entropy has as much authority in the Alliance as he used to, much less Passing Monarch. I agree. Based on what insider information I've received, not only has the Freedom Alliance invited major powers like ours to this meeting, but it's also invited Giant's Heart from the Sea God's realm. Giant's Heart? You mean the guild that stole the Flare Fortress from the Pride Empire in the Fire Dragon Empire? The very same. Is there another Giant's Heart I don't know about? When the various representatives heard mention of Giant's Heart, their expressions darkened. They had never thought the superpower from the sea god's realm would try to claim a piece of the pie. Ordinary players might not have heard of Giant's Heart, but the various major powers that paid constant attention to the shifts of power within God's domain would be quite familiar with the name by now. The superpower had successfully stolen a fortress from the Pride Empire, a super guild. With that move, Giant's Heart had proven that it was powerful enough to shake the various superpowers on the main continent. If Giant's Heart intervened in the Freedom Alliance's matters, it was almost certain to claim a large fraction of the Alliance's resources. Meanwhile, while the various major powers' representatives conversed, another fleet approached Starfall Island. Once they noticed the fleet, these representatives gaped, shocked. This fleet consisted of 60-plus bronze speedboats, 11 mysterious iron speedboats, and 5 sailboats, 2 of which were bronze rank. This fleet was easily several times stronger than the various powers, and every ship bore the Giant's Heart Guild emblem on its sails. As these ships docked, over 1,000 players disembarked. Every one of these players was level 96 or above, with many at level 97. The weakest piece of equipment on these players was level 95 fine gold rank, and over a dozen of them wore level 95 fine gold set equipment. As for the several players leading the group wore a minimum of 5 pieces of epic equipment. As these players walked through the port, the various major powers members unconsciously stepped aside to open a path. Amazing! Too amazing! So, this is Giant's Heart? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Even if Zero Wing makes a personal appearance, Immortal Light will get nothing but the Freedom Alliance's scraps. These representatives couldn't help but admire the strength of Giant's Heart's fleet and members. Shortly after Giant's Heart's fleet docked, more ships appeared on the horizon. A sailboat, which was much larger than bronze sailboats and required 3 mainsails, led this small fleet. A faint layer of mana enveloped the entire sailboat. What is that? That sailboat is actually protected by a magic barrier. Wait, that's a mysterious iron sailboat. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.